The rain had come to Winterfell in earnest, a drumming torrent against the ancient gray walls and the roofs of slate and shingle, cloaking the world in a blur of mist and cold and the smell of earth. It was a rain that washed away old scents of hay and sweat and dogs and horses, and replaced them with a clean dampness that clung to the air, the stone, the men themselves. In the godswood, the weirwood's leaves shimmered with droplets, red and alive, and rivulets trickled from the carved face and the pale trunk, as if the old gods themselves were weeping for what was to come. Jon Snow stood in the godswood beneath that face, hair plastered to his brow, cloak heavy with water, feeling the pulse of his own heart against the silence and the rain. He had come here to be alone, to think, or perhaps to escape the press of feasting and laughter in the great hall. A laughter that, though real, seemed to come from a world apart, one Jon could never truly belong to. He stood barefoot in the mud, his boots discarded by the pool's edge, and stared into the swirling reflections of leaves and gray sky, and the white face above, as if he could divine some answer there. He was 16, lean and dark, his hair always falling into his eyes, the beard just beginning to show on his chin. Bastard. The word clung to him like a curse and a second skin, no matter the fine tunic he wore or the respect shown him by the men of Winterfell. He was Ned Stark's blood, everyone knew it, but not Ned Stark's son. Not truly. And so he had grown accustomed to the margins, the shadowed places at feast, the silences at council, the pause before every word spoken to him, as if the speaker measured something unsaid in the air. But today, he felt a restlessness deeper than usual, a heaviness he could not name. He knelt in the mud, feeling the cold bite through to his knees, and pressed his palm to the old rough trunk. "Give me a sign," Jon whispered, not sure what god he spoke to, or what sign he hoped for. "Tell me who I am. Tell me what I'm meant to do." He waited, listening. Only the rain answered, hissing through the branches and dappling the surface of the pool. A footstep sounded behind him. Jon turned, already knowing by the careful tread that it was not Robb or Arya, not Bran or Sansa, not even Theon Greyjoy, who walked like a shadow with a fox's grin. It was Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, his father in all but name, come silent as winter itself. Ned wore his great gray cloak and a simple leather doublet, his face hard as the stones of the castle, the lines of grief and resolve deep etched around his eyes. The rain did not seem to touch him, or perhaps he simply endured it, as he endured all things. "Jon," Ned said softly. Jon rose, wiping mud from his hands, feeling suddenly young and raw. "Father." Ned came to stand beside him before the tree, silent for a long time. The rain pattered on the leaves overhead, dripping from Ned's hair, glinting in his beard. Jon watched his father's face and saw the weight there. A weight that had grown heavier since the king's arrival days past. King Robert Baratheon, fat and red-faced, all bluster and booming laughter, with his retinue of Lannisters and banners streaming gold and crimson. He had come to Winterfell with the whole realm in tow, and with him had come secrets, old wounds, and a sense of doom that Jon felt but did not understand. He had watched his father grow more grave with every passing day, watched the silent words exchanged between Eddard Stark and Catelyn, heard the name Lannister whispered with unease in the halls. Now in the godswood, Ned seemed carved from stone, ancient and enduring, the very image of the North. For a moment, Jon saw not just the Lord, but the Father, tired, burdened, loving, afraid. Ned knelt beside him, his hand resting on the damp grass. "When I was a boy," Ned began, voice low, "my father would bring me here, to pray beneath the heart tree. He told me that the old gods see all, and that here, a man may speak truth, no matter how hard." Jon waited, unsure. Ned's eyes found his. "You are my son, Jon. In all ways but one. I've been hard on you. Harder than I ever wished. I thought it would protect you. I see now. Perhaps it only hurt. Mendermowland." Jon swallowed, feeling a prickling behind his eyes. "I know, Father." "Do you?" Ned's gaze sharpened. "You have lived half your life in shadow, Jon. half your life with only half a name. I would change that if I could. Jon looked down. I know what I am. I know my place. Ned grunted softly. Not a laugh, not an agreement. Your place, he echoed. Jon, listen to me now. What I tell you must never leave these woods, not until I say, swear it. Jon's heart thudded, and he nodded. I swear. Ned's face seemed to pale, and he drew a folded scrap of parchment from within his doublet. The rain had not touched it. He handed it to Jon, who opened it with trembling fingers. It was a letter, sealed with black wax. The dire wolf of Stark pressed deep. The writing was a stranger's hand, flowing, elegant, yet hurried. Jon read the words, once, twice. The breath caught in his throat. He looked up, eyes wide. Father, is this? Ned nodded. Your mother's hand. Before she died, she wrote this letter to me. I never showed it to you, or to anyone. I thought it better you never knew. But the world is changing, Jon. The king is dying. Robert, he may not last the month. The realm will tear itself apart when he goes, and the wolves must be ready. I cannot leave you in shadow any longer. Jon tried to speak, but could not. His mind spun with the words. Mother, my mother. Ned's hand closed over Jon's, the letter between their palms. Your mother was not a whore, Jon. She was Lyanna Stark. My sister Tati. The rain fell harder, sudden and wild. Jon felt dizzy, as if the ground shifted beneath him. That's not possible. She died at the Tower of Joy. Everyone knows. She died, yes, Ned said softly. But not before she gave you to me. I promised her I would protect you, whatever the cost. I claimed you as mine to keep you safe from those who would see you dead. It is not only shame that made me silent. It was fear for you, for the realm. There are those in the south who would kill you for your blood, Jon, for your name. Jon's thoughts reeled. Lyanna Stark. Not a bastard. Not even a Snow. Who was my father then? He whispered. Ned looked away, pain twisting his face. I cannot say. Not yet. Too many ears, too much danger. Know only this. You are of Stark blood. True and full. You are no one's bastard. Jon pressed his fist to his mouth, blinking back tears. Why? Why, tell me now. Because the king's death will shatter the peace of the realm, Ned said, his voice hard. Because I fear for the North. I fear for you. If war comes, as I believe it must, you must be ready. You are my heir, Jon. Not Robb will be Lord of Winterfell, as is his right. But you must be ready to lead. To be king. If the North calls it so. Jon's eyes widened in disbelief. Nay, but Robb. Robb is my son. He will rule the North. But you are my sister's son. There is more in you, Jon. You may have a part to play beyond these walls. If I fall, or if the realm descends into chaos, you must have the truth, and the strength to claim what is yours, if it comes to it. Jon stared at the letter in his hand, words blurring, heart pounding. I don't understand, he said helplessly. Why me? Why not Robb or Bran or... Because you are not just a Stark, Ned said quietly. You are more than that. The blood of the wolf and another great house runs in your veins. There are forces in the world that would see you dead for that blood, and forces that would rally to you. If Robert dies, the realm may look to the North for strength. They will look for a king. And if they do, I would see a Stark sit that throne. A true Stark. My sister's son Nawine. Medindawansh. Jon felt as if he were drowning, rain streaming down his face. He thought of Robb, of Sansa, Arya, little Rickon, and Bran in his bed, paralyzed and dreaming strange dreams. He thought of his own dreams, of fighting at the wall, of running with Ghost through snow and darkness, of being a lord, a man respected and loved. He had never dared to dream of being more. He found his voice at last. "If what you say is true, if the realm calls, would you stand with me, father?" Ned's eyes met his, gray and steady, and Jon saw love there, fierce and unyielding. "I would stand with you, Jon, until my dying breath." And now, they knelt together before the weirwood, father and son, and Jon pressed his forehead to the wet bark, the old gods watching, the world trembling. The days that followed blurred together, the rain falling without cease, turning the yard to a sea of mud, and dampening even the spirits of King Robert's entourage. But within the stone walls of Winterfell, something electric thrummed in the air, a sense of change, heavy and portentous, noticed only by those with eyes to see. Jon found himself watching his father more closely, noting the quiet discussions with Maester Luwin, the letters sent south by Raven, the long walks taken alone in the Godswood. He saw the way Ned Stark's hand lingered on his shoulder, the softening in his voice when he spoke Jon's name. It was as if some unspoken bond had been reforged between them. Stronger now, more vital. Yet Jon kept his secret close. He said nothing to Robb or Arya, nothing even to Sam or the others in the yard. The weight of the letter, its words burned into his mind, seemed to press upon him at every moment. He began to wonder who he truly was, and what that might mean for the world. He saw less of King Robert, who spent his days in feasting and hunting, his laughter echoing through the halls like a challenge. The king drank deep and spoke louder, his face florid and sweating, his moods shifting like the weather. He would bellow for Ned, embracing him as brother, then turn sullen and storm off to the comfort of Queen Cersei or the company of his own knights. Jon avoided the king's retinue, the Lannisters with their watchful golden eyes, Sir Jaime all cold charm and lethal grace, the imp Tyrion with his sly smiles and quick wit. Only once did he cross paths with Queen Cersei, who looked upon him with cool disdain, her green eyes flicking to his cloak and back, as if measuring him for some private game. But it was in the small hours, with the castle quiet and the fire burning low in the hearth, that Jon would sit by Ghost in the solar and read the letter over and over, tracing the lines with his thumb. Lyanna. Oh, my mother, not a whore, not a shame, but a Stark. He began to dream of her face. Soft, blurred, half-remembered from the stories old Nan had told him. Stories of the wolf maid who ran with the wild horses and laughed at the world. He thought of her riding through the snows, hair streaming, a sword at her side. He wondered if she would have loved him. Had she lived, if she would have called him son. One night, as the rain battered the windows, Jon heard a knock at his door. He rose, heart thudding, and found his father standing in the corridor, his face set, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Come," Ned said. "There is something you must see." They moved through the darkened halls, the torches guttering in the drafts, down stone stairs to the crypts below the castle. Jon shivered, feeling the old cold rise from the earth, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and dust. Ghost padded behind, silent and white, eyes glowing in the gloom. They passed the tombs of the ancient kings, the long line of stone wolves and men, until they came to the final resting place of Lyanna Stark. Her statue was newer, the stone less worn by years, but her face was kind and sad, carved in the image of a young woman gone too soon. Blue roses were scattered at her feet, placed there by some unseen hand. Ned stood before the statue, his hands clasped, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I promised her, Jon. I swore it on my sword and on my honor. I would keep you safe no matter the cost. I have kept that promise. Now I ask you to keep it too." Jon felt his throat tighten. "How?" "If Robert dies, the world will change," Ned said, gaze fixed on Lyanna's stone face. "There will be war, and kings will rise and fall. The North may call for a king of its own, as it did in days past. If that happens, Jon, you must be ready to answer. You must be ready to lead, to hold the realm together, to protect those you love." Jon stared at the statue, at the blue roses and the long, sad face, and felt something awaken in him, a sense of purpose, of destiny, of terror. "I will," he said, voice trembling. I swear it." Ned placed a hand on his shoulder, and for a moment they stood together in silence, father and son, brother and sister, past and future. Word came 2 days later that the king had been injured in the hunt. A boar's tusk, deep and jagged, blood soaking the leaves of the godswood where Robert had fallen. Maester Pycelle tended him in his chambers, but the wound festered, and the king's fever rose with the day. The court fell into whispers and sharp glances. The Lannisters prowled the corridors like hungry lions, and Cersei's eyes glittered with secrets. In the solar, Ned Stark called his son to him. "Jon," he said, voice flat with weariness, "the time has come. Robert will not last the week. The lords of the realm will come to Winterfell soon, and the banners will be called. I must go south, to serve as hand. I will take you with me as my son. Not as a bastard. As Jon Stark, of Winterfell. If I do not return." He broke off, eyes burning. Jon straightened, heart hammering. "If you do not return, father, I will do as you bid. I will keep your promise." Ned nodded, pain and pride mingling in his gaze. "That is all I can ask." The days passed swiftly after that. Jon found himself swept into a world of decisions, plans, and secrets. Robb looked on with confusion, Sansa with envy, Arya with suspicion. Only Catelyn seemed truly afraid, her eyes haunted and red-rimmed. At last, on a gray morning, the lords gathered in the great hall. The rain had ceased, leaving the air sharp and clear, the sky a hard blue. Jon stood beside his father at the dais, ghost at his feet, feeling the weight of every eye upon him. Ned rose, his voice steady and strong. "My lords," he began, "the king is dying. The realm is at a crossroads. It is time the North stood as it once did. United, proud, unafraid. I name Jon Stark as my heir, true son of Winterfell, blood of my blood, wolf of my line. If I do not return, let him lead you. Let him be your king if the realm falls to chaos." Now, the hall erupted in shouts, some of outrage, some of awe, some of joy. Robb's face twisted in confusion. Ian glared. Maester Luwin looked stricken, but Jon only stood there, breathless, as the old world fell away, and a new one began. He was a king now, or near enough. The word echoed in his mind as he walked the ramparts that night, the sky clearing to reveal 1,000 cold stars. He felt the north beneath his feet, the wind in his hair, the eyes of the old gods upon him. He was Jon Stark, Jon of Winterfell. He was a king's son, a wolf's son, and his mother's heir. And as the world changed around him, as shadows gathered to the south and ravens flew, and the drums of war sounded faint in the night, Jon swore to himself that he would not fail. Not his father, not his mother, not the North, not himself. Ready for the next 3,500 whenever you are. Okay. The wind swept cold and clear across the battlements, scouring the stone of Winterfell with its invisible hand, carrying with it scents of pine and lingering rain and the sharp memory of snow. Jon lingered long after the great hall had emptied, after the lords and knights had drunk themselves into a stupor, after his father's voice and pronouncement echoed in their ears like a thunderclap. He walked the walls alone but for Ghost, who padded at his side, the direwolf's white coat gleaming in the starlight. He could not sleep. Even now, hours after, his heart thudded with each step, and his mind whirled with the weight of words he had heard. His father's, spoken before all the banners of the North, and his own, spoken in the crypt, sworn to Lyanna's statue, words he could not take back. Jon Stark, dot of mind, heir of Winterfell. If the realm falls to chaos, let him be your king. He turned those words in his mind over and over, like stones in a stream, hoping to polish them into something he could bear. But every time he grasped at certainty, it slipped away, and only fear remained. Fear for his father, for the North, for the brothers and sisters he loved, for himself, for what he had never dreamed to want. At the far end of the battlement, a figure waited by the shadow of the broken tower. tall, broad-shouldered, his face in shadow. Robb, arms folded, gaze turned south toward where the king's encampment glimmered in the dark. Jon drew up beside him, uncertain. Robb did not look at him, not at first. His face, in profile, was caught between boy and man. Stubborn jaw, the stark gray in his eyes, russet hair stirring in the breeze. "They're still talking in the hall," Robb said, voice stiff. "Arguing, drinking, all of them." The Umbers nearly came to blows with Lord Serwyn. Jon swallowed, searching for words. "I know." A silence, not quite comfortable. Robb shifted, anger and confusion chasing each other across his features. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded suddenly, low and fierce. "Why did Father wait until now? Until all of them were watching, to say it?" Jon shook his head. Shame burning. "He swore me to silence. I didn't want it, Robb. Not like this. I never wanted to take anything from you." "Menendorsiu." Robb snorted, a bitter sound. "Take? What is there to take, Jon? I'll still be Lord of Winterfell, Father said so. But now the whole North's talking. About you. About kings and blood and old stories. They'll talk for years. All the banners, all the small folk, everyone. Jon Stark, the true heir, the king in the North, they'll say. And what am I then?" Jon felt the old wound open between them, sharp and aching. For years, he and Robb had been as close as brothers could be, bound by snow and frost and old walls. But this was something deeper, older, a rift neither had chosen. "You're still my brother," Jon said softly. "You always will be. That hasn't changed." Robb looked at him then, eyes shining in the dark. "I don't want it, Jon. I never did. I wish Father had told us. I wish I could understand." "So do I," Jon whispered. Ghost brushed against Jon's legs. A silent comfort. Together, the boys stood on the wall, watching the torches fade in the yard below. Above them, the stars blazed, cold and indifferent. The next morning dawned raw and gray, mist clinging to the fields, the air heavy with the scent of smoke and damp earth. The bells rang out across Winterfell, calling the lords to council, and Jon found himself drawn into a tide of events he could not resist. He ate quickly, hardly tasting bread and honey, then dressed in a doublet of dark wool, his hair pulled back with a leather thong. He looked in the glass, expecting to see some change, a shadow of a crown perhaps, or his mother's eyes staring back at him. But it was only Jon, only a boy with too much on his shoulders. In the great hall, Ned sat at the head of the high table, Maester Luwin at his right hand, Robb beside him, pale and silent. Jon stood at his father's left, Ghost at his feet, feeling the press of eyes. Lord Umber with his wild beard and booming laugh, Lady Mormont, hard as ice, Sir Roderick Castle, whiskers twitching, men and women of the North, all gathered beneath the direwolf banners, their faces expectant, wary. Curious. Ned raised a hand, and silence fell. "We are gathered at a turning of the world," Ned said, his voice low but carrying to every corner. "King Robert lies dying, and the Lannisters gather like crows about a corpse. The North must be ready, whatever comes. I go south to serve the king, as he commands. In my absence, Robb will rule Winterfell. But if the worst should happen, if the realm falls to war, if the old order breaks, I have named Jon Stark as my heir, as king, should the banners of the North call for it." A murmur rippled through the hall. Lord Manderley, vast and solemn, bowed his head. "The North remembers, Lord Stark," he said. "We will do as you command." One by one the lords and ladies nodded, some reluctantly, some with pride. Only Lady Dustin spoke out, her voice sharp. "A bastard crowned in Winterfell? What will the South say to that?" "He is no bastard," Ned replied, cool as the wall. "He is my sister's son, true-born, of Stark blood. The old gods know it, and so do I." Jon stood silent, feeling the judgment in every gaze. He met Lady Dustin's eyes and did not flinch. She looked away, lips tight. Afterward, as the hall emptied, Ned laid a hand on Jon's shoulder. "Walk with me, son." They moved through the castle, past the kitchens and smithy, past the mews where the ravens cawed and rustled in their cages. Ned's face was grim, lines of worry etched deep. "I leave tomorrow," he said. "Robert cannot wait, and the Queen's eyes are everywhere. You will stay here with Robb until I send for you." Jon nodded, throat tight. "And if you don't return, then you must be ready," Ned said. "You, and Robb, and all the North. I pray it will not come to that." They parted in the yard, Ned pressing Jon's hand once, hard, then turning away. Jon watched his father go, the cloak billowing behind him, the weight of 1,000 years pressing on his shoulders. The next day, the king's party departed. Robert, pale and shrunken, rode a litter borne by 4 strong men, his face gray as ashes. Queen Cersei rode beside him, her gaze as sharp as a knife, her sons behind. Joffrey, golden-haired and sullen. Tommen and Myrcella, wide-eyed and silent. Ned rode with them, his men behind. He looked back only once, raising a hand to his sons upon the ramparts. Jon stood with Robb, Bran and Rickon between them. Arya on the other side, her face pinched with worry. As the banners faded into the mist, Jon felt a chill settle in his bones. He was alone now, or near enough. Lord of nothing, king of air. Winterfell in the days after was a different place, quieter, more tense. Robb threw himself into his duties, learning the ledgers and accounts, walking the walls, listening to the old men in the yard. Jon watched from a distance, uncertain how to help, uncertain where he belonged. Arya spent her days in the practice yard. Syrio Forel, her laughter sharp as steel. Sansa took to her chambers, sewing and sighing, her eyes red from crying. Bran drifted like a ghost, his dreams growing stranger. Rickon was wild, clinging to the direwolves and weeping for his father. Catelyn Stark was nowhere to be seen. Jon wandered the castle by day, finding solace in the Godswood, or sitting by the fire in the great hall. Ghost curled at his feet. He took to riding the fields beyond the walls, sometimes with Theon, more often alone, letting the wind scour his thoughts. At night he dreamed of crowns and blood, of blue roses and burning towers, of his mother's face. Sometimes he woke gasping, heart racing, Ghost standing over him with eyes full of worry. A week passed, then 2. Letters came from the south, news of the king's decline, of tensions at court, of Lannisters moving against Stark men in King's Landing. Ned's words were few, cautious. But Jon read between the lines. Danger grew with every passing day. Robb summoned Jon to the solar late one evening, the fire burning low, maps and ledgers scattered across the table. Robb looked older, harder, his jaw set. "I need you," Robb said. "Father left me as Lord of Winterfell, but you know as much as I do. More sometimes. I can't do this alone." Jon hesitated. "I don't want to take anything from you." Robb's mouth twisted in a smile. "You aren't. We're brothers, remember. Father would want us to stand together. The banners will look to us both if war comes. We need to be ready." Together, they pored over the maps, planning how to call the banners, how to defend the castle, how to feed the small folk through a long winter. It felt right, the two of them side by side, the old rivalry forgotten for a time. The first snows came early, dusting the yard and fields with white. Jon walked the battlements, watching the world change, feeling the pull of something vast and implacable. Fate, perhaps, or simply the turning of the seasons. Ghost ranged beside him, nose to the wind. It was there, in the half-light of dawn, that a raven found him. The bird was black and wild, eyes like polished jet. Its message was brief, written in his father's hand. "Jon, the king is dead. Trust no one. Guard the north. Eddard Stark." Jon stared at the words until they burned into his mind, his breath steaming in the cold. The king is dead. Trust no one. guard the north. He found Robb in the hall, breaking his fast with cold meat and ale. Jon handed him the letter, watched his brother's face grow pale. "War," Robb said. "It's coming." Jon nodded, feeling the weight settle on his shoulders. "We have to be ready." Robb looked up, determination in his eyes. "The Lords will expect us to lead, Jon. You, especially." Jon's voice was steady. "Then we will lead." The banners came swiftly after, riding through snow and mud, the wolves and mermen and flayed men of the north gathering beneath Winterfell's walls. Lord Umber and Lady Mormont, House Tallheart, House Glover, and more, each bringing men and news of unrest. Whispers flew like crows, of Lannisters marching, of southern armies, of betrayals in King's Landing. Jon and Robb stood together in the hall, hearing the lords out, weighing each word. Some spoke openly for war, others for caution. Lord Manderly, as massive as ever, voiced the thought all were thinking. "Winter is coming, and with it, death," Manderly rumbled. "If we are to have a king in the north, better it be a Stark. Better it be one of you." The hall erupted in argument, but Jon felt a strange calm settle in him. He remembered his father's words, "You must be ready," and nodded to Robb, who looked back at him, understanding in his gaze. "We stand together," Robb said at last. "Ace brothers, as Starks." The lords grumbled, but none spoke against. That night, Jon walked the Godswood alone, snow falling in soft flakes, the world quiet and new. He knelt beneath the weirwood, the letter from his father clutched in his hand, and whispered his prayers to the old gods and to Lyanna, whose face haunted his dreams. He felt the weight of all the north on his shoulders, but beneath it, something else. A sense of belonging, of purpose, of destiny. He was Jon Stark, and the world would soon know it. He rose, brushing snow from his cloak, and turned to find Arya standing behind him, her hair wild, eyes bright. "You're going to be king, aren't you?" she said, voice full of awe and something like pride. Jon smiled, the first real smile in days. "If the North calls for it, if Robb agrees." Arya grinned, fierce and wild. "Good. The North needs a wolf, not a lion." She hugged him, arms tight around his waist, then turned and ran, her laughter echoing in the snow. Jon watched her go, his heart lightened, just a little. Above him, the heart tree watched in silence, and the snow fell, soft as memory, across the face of Winterfell. War came with the spring thaw, as word reached Winterfell of southern armies on the march, of Ned Stark imprisoned, accused of treason. The North howled in outrage, banners called, swords sharpened, armor polished. In the great hall, before all the lords and ladies, Jon stood beside Robb, their cloaks of gray fur and black wool clasped with the direwolf. The lords raised their swords and voices, calling for justice, for vengeance, for a king in the north. Jon looked at Robb, at his brothers and sisters, at the faces of the north, and felt the tide of history rising all around him. He raised his sword, Ghost at his side, and the hall roared its answer. The wolf had risen, and the realm would tremble. Ka. The fire in the great hall was reduced to a bed of glowing embers by the time the voices of the North's lords had faded, their oaths echoing in the stone corridors. The night pressed cold and hard against the arrow slits, and the moon, nearly full, cast a silvery pallor over Winterfell's ancient walls. Jon sat in the solar, the direwolf ghost curled at his feet, parchment scattered across the heavy oak table before him. Each letter, each dispatch from south and east and west, seemed to weigh a stone, and every stone pressed a little harder on his chest. He had not slept since the banners first assembled. Not truly. He drifted through days on the edge of exhaustion, every hour demanding a new decision, every face. Umber, Mormont, Glover, Tallheart, watching him with careful expectation. Even Robb, who walked beside him now in all things, seemed changed by the weight of their new duties. They no longer raced in the yard or jested in the kitchens. Those boys were gone, and only the sons of Eddard Stark remained. The door creaked, and Robb entered. bearing a fresh letter in hand. His cheeks were ruddy with wind, his hair damp from the fog. He tossed the message onto the table. "From Moat Cailin," Robb said. "Theon returned an hour ago. He says the road is clear, but there are whispers of Lannister men moving through the Riverlands. Outriders, mostly, harrying the small folk." Jon rubbed his eyes. "We expected as much. Any sign of southern banners?" None yet." Robb paced the length of the solar, boots thudding against the flagstones. "But the lords grow restless. They want a battle, or a king, or both. They want vengeance for father." The word hung in the air. Ned Stark, alive but imprisoned in King's Landing, accused of treason by the Queen and her kin. Each day, another raven brought news, whispers, threats, rumors that Ned would confess, or that he would die before a crowd of Lannister banners. Jon's jaw tightened. "Have you decided?" Robb stopped before the hearth, his silhouette limned in firelight. "They're pushing for you, Jon. Not all, but enough. Lord Umber, Lady Mormont, half the Glovers. They say you're a king already, with father's blessing and the old god's favor." Jon shook his head. "I'm your brother. I'll stand with you, whatever you choose." A silence, deep as the snow outside. Robb knelt by Ghost, stroking the direwolf's thick fur. "I don't want the North to be torn in two. We need to be strong now more than ever. If I must bend the knee to my own brother, so be it. Father would have us united." Jon stared at his brother. No, his friend, his equal. A warmth, fierce and painful, swept through him. "If I am king, you are my right hand. We do this together. The North stands or falls with both of us." Robb smiled, the lines of strain softening for a moment. "Together then, always." They clasped hands, and for a moment the burdens fell away. The fire popped and hissed. Outside, the watchman's horn called the changing of the guard. The next morning, Jon stood before the Godswood's heart tree, its red leaves damp with dew, the white bark cold beneath his palm. The sky was bruised violet, the sunrise hidden behind a bank of cloud. Jon breathed the damp air and tried to remember the boy he had been. The one who ran with Ghost through these same trees, who dreamed of the Wall and the Night's Watch, who never thought to wear a crown or bear the hopes of a people. Arya appeared, as she always did, as if summoned by his need. Her hair was wild, her cheek smudged with mud, needle belted at her hip. "You're up early," she said, swinging herself onto a root beside him. Jon smiled. A true one this time. Couldn't sleep. She watched him with sharp gray eyes, so much like their father's. "Are you going to do it? Are you going to let them crown you?" Jon was silent, letting the question hang between them. "I don't know. I never wanted any of this." Arya nudged him with her shoulder. "You never want anything for yourself. That's why they all trust you." He looked at her, a little in awe. She was a child in some ways, but there was steel beneath her skin. "Would you follow me, if I did?" Arya grinned. A flash of teeth. "I'd follow you anywhere, Jon, even to King's Landing. Someone needs to keep you from being too solemn." He laughed, surprising himself. Ghost raised his head, tongue lolling. For a moment, the world was only trees, and old gods, and the unbreakable bond of a pack. The day of the council came cold and hard, banners snapping above the gatehouse, the yard alive with the tramp of booted feet, and the scent of boiled leather and sharpened steel. The lords gathered in the great hall, the air thick with expectation. Jon stood at the high table, Robb at his right, the northern banners draped behind them. A sea of gray and white, mermen and bears, pine trees and horses. Lady Mormont, straight-backed and hard-eyed, stood first. "The South has its lions. Let them roar and tear each other apart. We remember the days when the North had its own king, when the Starks ruled from the Wall to the neck. I say the time has come again." Ben, Lord Umber, massive and red-bearded, pounded his fist on the table. "Jon Stark, king in the North." Others took up the cry, some shouting for Robb, some for Jon, but most, by numbers and by will, for Jon. Robb watched with a measured pride, his face unreadable. Jon raised his hands and the hall quieted. He looked at every lord and lady, every knight and bannerman, and saw in their eyes not just hope but fear. The North was poised on a knife's edge, and he was that knife. "I will not take the crown lightly," Jon said, his voice carrying to every shadowed corner. "I am your father's son, but I am also his sister's. My mother was Lyanna Stark, and I bear that truth with pride. But I will not be king without my brother, without Robb at my side. If you call me king, know that I will fight for you, die for you, and rule for you. But I will not do it alone." And there was a long moment of silence. Then Robb stepped forward, sword drawn, and knelt before Jon. "The king in the north," he called, and one by one the lords and knights followed, kneeling, pledging their swords, their banners, their lives. Jon felt the weight settle on his brow, heavier than any iron. But he stood straight and accepted their oaths, and when they rose, it was as if the north itself had breathed a sigh of relief. That night, the halls filled with music and laughter. Raw, nervous, defiant. Ale flowed, songs were sung, and the old wolf banners waved above the dais. Jon moved among the lords, listening, learning, offering a word here, a nod there. He saw the hope kindle in their eyes, saw the way they stood a little straighter, spoke a little louder. The North was awake, alive, united. But beneath the revelry, darker thoughts lingered. Ned Stark was still a prisoner, and in King's Landing, the Queen held all the cards. Jon knew it would take more than banners and oaths to free his father, to secure the North. Late, when the fires burned low, and the last of the singers stumbled from the hall, Jon found Sansa seated alone on the stone bench beneath the weirwood. Her face was pale in the moonlight, her eyes red-rimmed. He sat beside her, the silence gentle, not hard. She spoke first. "They'll kill him, won't they?" Jon did not lie. "If the Lannisters have their way." She nodded, hands clasped in her lap. "I used to dream of King's Landing, of being a queen, of court and song and knights. Now I dream only of father coming home." Nenderwanand. He put an arm around her, awkward but honest. "We will do all we can, I promise." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat together, brother and sister, beneath the watchful gaze of the old gods. In the days that followed, preparations were made for war. Ravens flew from the rookery in waves, calling the last of the North's banners to Winterfell. The smithies glowed day and night, forging swords and armor. Maester Luwin worked alongside Lady Mormont, gathering stores of grain, wool, salted meat. Jon spent his days in council, learning from Robb how to keep a castle supplied, from Sir Roderick how to drill men in the yard, from Maester Luwin how to read between the lines of southern letters. He met with the lords each evening, weighing their complaints, balancing pride and fear like a juggler with too many knives. Yet every dawn, he walked the gods' wood alone, seeking guidance from the silent trees. The old gods gave no answers, but he felt their eyes nonetheless. Robb grew into his new role with every day, his voice firmer, his bearing more lordly. There were times, late at night, when the two of them would sit before the fire, sharing wine and memory, and for a moment they were just brothers, planning feasts and dreaming of summers to come. But the dream always broke, and the next day brought more burdens. Theon Greyjoy was the first to chafe. He came to Jon one morning, swagger in his walk, a shadow in his eye. "You mean to march on King's Landing?" Theon demanded, arms folded. "Or will you let them bleed your father behind the walls while we sit safe in Winterfell?" Jon held his gaze. "We cannot march yet. Not until the banners are gathered, and the way south is clear." Theon snorted. "If it were my father." Jon's voice was sharp, colder than he meant. "But it isn't, is it? You may wear a wolf's cloak, Theon, but you are not one of us. I will not waste the North's blood on a fool's errand. When we ride to win." Theon flushed, but did not speak again. Later, Jon saw him in the yard, sparring too hard, his anger burning bright. On the 10th day, As the sun burned through the clouds, a raven arrived from the eyrie. Lady Lysa Arryn, sister to Catelyn Stark, wrote of danger, of betrayal, of Lannister assassins and plots against the Vale. She urged Jon to send aid, to trust no one, to remember the blood of his mother. Robb read the letter, lips tight. The world is tearing itself apart. Jon nodded, voice low. It is. He sent messages to White Harbor and Bear Island, asking for more men, more ships. He ordered the forging of new spears and arrows. He wrote to his mother, to Bran, to little Rickon, words of comfort he barely believed. That night, as the hall emptied and the fires guttered low, Jon walked the battlements, Ghost at his side. The air was sharp, tinged with frost. Below, the banners snapped in the wind. He wondered if Ned Stark could see them. If somewhere in the darkness his father felt hope. A shadow moved beside him, and Jon turned, hand on sword. It was Maester Luwin, hunched and tired, eyes grave. "My lord," Luwin said. "Another raven from King's Landing. The Queen demands your fealty. She warns that any act of war will mean your father's death." Jon stared into the dark, the words like ice. "And if I bend the knee?" Luwin shook his head. "It would not matter. The Lannisters want the North broken. Only strength will save us now." Jon nodded, feeling the weight settle deeper. "Then we will give them strength." On the 12th day, the banners were all assembled. 15,000 swords and spears, 2,000 horse, archers from the Wolfswood, axemen from Deepwood Motte. The yard rang with the sound of practice, the air thick with the scent of sweat and fear and hope. Jon rode through the ranks, Robb beside him, Ghost loping silent at their side. The men cheered them, swords raised, voices rising in a single word. "Stark! Stark! Stark!" He saw boys younger than himself, old men who had seen 2 winters as harsh as this, women in mail, faces lined and proud. He saw faith and desperation, the raw, hungry hope of a people on the edge. When he returned to the hall, Arya was waiting, her face pale with excitement. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Jon knelt, holding her hands in his. "We are. The time has come." She bit her lip. "Take me with you." He smiled, soft and sad. "Not yet, little wolf. The North needs you here, with Mother and Bran. You'll keep them safe." Arya hugged him hard, face pressed to his chest. "Promise you'll come back." "I promise," Jon whispered, though he could not know if it was true. At dawn, the North rode south. Jon wore his sword, his father's cloak, the weight of the crown invisible but real. Robb rode at his side, the direwolves running before them, the banners of the Starks streaming in the wind. The last sound he heard as the gates closed behind was Arya's voice, fierce and clear. The king in the North. The road south was mud and cold and hardship, but the North marched as one. At Moat Cailin, they found the neck fortified by loyal men, word having reached even the Crannogman. Jon met with Howland Reed by torchlight, discussing swamps and secrets, old pacts and new loyalties. News from the Riverlands came thick and fast. Lannisters burning, pillaging, Lord Tywin's army crushing towns and small folk alike. Jon's jaw tightened with each dispatch, but he held the army to the slow pace that war demanded. They would not be drawn into ruin by haste. On the 3rd night, he called council in his tent. Robb, Theon, Lord Umber, Lady Mormont, Sir Roderick. The fire snapped, maps spread between them. "We must cross the Twins," Robb said. "Walder Frey holds the bridge. He will want payment." Jon's eyes narrowed. "We'll give him what we must, but I will not leave the North's fate in a Frey's hands." Theon grinned, reckless. "I'll ride ahead." "Speak to him." Jon shook his head. "You'll ride with Robb. The North must stand together, even at the gates of traitors." And now, a murmur of agreement circled the fire. Lady Mormont spoke last. "What of your father?" Jon's voice was iron. "We march to free him, or die in the attempt." At the Twins, Walder Frey was as sly as promised, demanding oaths, hostages, and marriages. Jon swallowed his pride. agreed to send one of his men as a surety, and secured passage. South of the crossing, the world changed. The riverlands lay in ruin, smoke staining the horizon, bodies swinging from trees. The smell of death rode the breeze. Jon saw it all with grim eyes, but he did not flinch. He sent riders ahead to the lords of the Trident, calling them to his banner. Some came, Mallister, Blackwood, Bracken. Some only watched and waited. At last, word reached them of a great host camped outside River Run, and of Lannister banners advancing. The time had come. Jon called his men together, his voice carrying in the cold dusk. Tonight, we fight not for glory, not for conquest, but for the North, for our fathers and mothers, for our brothers and sisters, for the freedom of our land. The lions think the wolf has grown weak. We will show them the North remembers. The men roared their answer. Robb raised his sword, and Jon did the same, the moon glinting off steel. That night, before the battle, Jon walked alone to the riverbank, the stars reflected in the black water. He knelt, the earth cold and wet beneath his knees. "Mother," he whispered, thinking of Lyanna taught. "Father, old gods and new, give me strength, make me worthy of their trust. Let me bring him home." He stood, heart pounding, and turned to see Robb waiting, sword in hand, eyes bright with hope and terror. "Ready?" Robb asked. Jon nodded. "For Winterfell, for the North." "Then shall." The brothers embraced, and together they walked into war. Okay. They marched beneath a sky both sullen and magnificent, clouds roiling and luminous above the plain where the river coiled in silver. By dawn the camp was a restless city of banners and firelight. The mists had lifted. Crows called from the bare willows on the water's edge. Jon rode out at first light, Ghost loping silent at his stirrup, to see the host that had answered the call of Winterfell. Wolves, mermen, pine trees, bears, the banners of the North, tattered and proud, a wall of color against the battered countryside. He passed through the encampments, nodding to old faces and young, accepting the salutes of seasoned men and half-grown boys alike. They looked to him as their king, and Jon felt the truth of it pressing down on him. A duty greater than fear, a purpose that stilled his hand and lent steel to his voice. Robb found him at the river's ford, his own horse tossing its mane in the mist. "Scouts returned from the west," he said without preamble. "Lannisters. 3,000 at least, cavalry mostly. Sir Adam Marbrand rides with them." Jon listened, hearing in his brother's voice the tension that had kept them both from sleep. "Tywin's son," Jon said, "but not Tywin himself." "Not yet." Robb leaned in, his words for Jon's ears alone. "Some say Lord Tywin sits farther south, massing for River Run. Others say he waits for the Vulture's feast. Our host outnumbers theirs, but they are Lannisters." Jon's voice was as hard as the ground. "We must be careful." They returned together to the command tent, a circle of wool and canvas where the lords of the North gathered with battered maps, their faces drawn but unbowed. The great river ran close by, swift and brown with the thaw, the sound of its waters an undertone to every word. "We have two choices," Robb told the council, laying out the options. "We meet them here, where the river will guard our flank, or we march west, force them into the marshland where their cavalry is blind." Umber wanted to charge. Glover counseled caution. Lady Mormont, in her clipped, precise tone, argued for patience. "The Lannisters want us to come to them. They will use every trick. Feints, ambushes, gold and guile. If we hold here, let them break against us, we will show them northern steel." Jon considered her words. His mind reached for a memory of Ned Stark, kneeling beneath the weirwood, reminding him that a true king listens before he speaks. He traced the map with a gloved finger, seeing not just ground and road, but the way rivers wound and mists rose, the way men moved under fear and hope. "We hold," Jon said at last, quietly but with conviction. "The North is not made for wild charges. We have the river, we have the will. Let them come to us, and when they do, we break them." No one argued, and that night, Sentries doubled their watch as the host settled to wait. The air before battle is always different. A tautness, a stillness, as if the world itself were holding breath. Jon rose before the dawn and walked the lines, Ghost pacing beside him. Pausing to speak to small knots of men, he found Arya among the quartermasters. Sleeves rolled up, eyes wide with excitement and dread. "Don't do anything reckless," Jon said, resting a hand on her shoulder. Arya wrinkled her nose. "You always say that." He smiled, remembering their old games. The way she had shadowed his every step as a child. "I mean it. If the lines break, you run for the river and find Robb. Do you understand?" Arya made a face but nodded. "Promise you'll come back?" "I promise." He hoped it was not a lie. When he returned to the command tent, the light had begun to pale the eastern sky. Robb stood by the entrance, his sword strapped to his hip, mail gleaming beneath his wolfskin cloak. "We ride out together," Robb said. "If today is our day to die, we die as Starks. Today is the day we win," Jon answered, and the words felt true as he spoke them. The Lannister host advanced at sunrise, a red tide of steel and banners, horses snorting, the sun flashing off their armor. Marbrand's standard rode at the fore, a burning tree on crimson. Jon gave the order, and the northern archers let fly a volley, arrows dark against the pale sky. Men fell in the first charge, and the battle was joined. The world shrank to chaos. Jon fought at Robb's side, his sword alive in his hands, Ghost a white streak in the smoke, and shouting. He lost all sense of time. Only the flash of blade, the grunt and scream of men, the press of bodies. Once, he saw Theon ride past, whooping, his axe wet with blood. Twice he lost sight of Robb and thought his heart would fail, until he found him again, surrounded by Umber men, hair flying, sword raised. The Lannisters pressed hard, trying to force the ford, but the North held. Jon moved where the fight was thickest, rallying broken lines, steadying nerves with a word or a look. The ground grew slick, and the air was thick with the reek of blood and wet grass. Still, the Lannisters pressed. Midday, a cry went up. The enemy had broken through on the left, pushing toward the baggage train where Arya and the other young squires helped defend. Jon spurred his horse, cutting through the melee, Ghost at his heels. He reached the train to find Arya swinging a spear at a Lannister sergeant, her face spattered with mud. He leapt from his horse, blade flashing. And in a moment, the attackers were dead or fled. Arya grinned at him, wild and breathless. "Told you I'd be fine." Jon wanted to scold her, but there was no time. He pressed a dagger into her belt. "Stay here." "I have to go." He rejoined the fight, the battle teetering, each line of men bending but not breaking. At last, as the sun was lowering in the sky, the Lannister left collapsed, their cavalry retreating in disorder. Robb's voice rose above the noise. "Advance, for Winterfell." The North surged forward, and in a final press, the enemy scattered. The river ran red with the wounded and dying. The plain was torn and littered with bodies, but the North had held. Night came soft and cold. The fires were kindled, the wounded tended, the dead counted. Jon found Robb in the healer's tent, his arm bandaged, his face streaked with sweat and soot. "You live," Robb said, voice hoarse. "I thought you'd gone to the Godswood." Jon knelt beside him, too tired for words. Arya burst in, dragging a Lannister helm as a trophy, her grin fierce and unrepentant. "You're both alive," she declared, as if daring the world to prove otherwise. Jon ruffled her hair, and for a moment, the three of them laughed, a sound of relief and exhaustion and kinship. They lost 500 men that day, but the Lannisters had lost more, and more still had surrendered. Lord Marbrand was among the prisoners, wounded but alive. Jon met with him before dawn, in a tent thick with the stink of pain and defeat. "I will treat your men well," Jon promised. "If you write to your lord, urge him to treat my father the same." Marbrand, proud and bloodied, managed a nod. "You fight like wolves, all of you. The realm will not forget this." Jon accepted the compliment, knowing it was more warning than praise. They buried the dead with northern rites, words spoken over each, stones laid for remembrance. Jon stood over the fallen, sword in hand, ghost silent beside him. He felt each loss like a wound. When the burials were done, he met with Robb and their council. "We march for River Run," Jon said. "Lord Stark still lives. If we move quickly, we may reach him before the Lannisters do." The lords agreed. The army moved on, its spirit hardened by victory and loss alike. Word went before them, riding swift as the wind. The North was coming, and it was led by a king. The journey to River Run was marked by hunger and hardship. Burned villages, ruined fields. The folk fled before them, or lined the road, desperate for food or vengeance. At every crossroads, news of Lannister cruelty hardened the Northmen's resolve. At last, the towers of River Run rose on the far bank, red in the dying sun. The Tully banner hung limp above the gates, the fish of the riverlands gray with dust. The host camped outside, weary and armed. Catelyn met them in the gatehouse, flanked by Tully men. She ran to her sons, weeping, embracing them with a fierce relief Jon had not felt in years. Even Arya received a rare kiss, her face flushed with pride. "They hold your father in the dungeons of the Red Keep," Catelyn told them night, voice tight with grief. "The Queen will not bargain. She means to break the North, to make an example." Robb's jaw clenched. "We ride for King's Landing then. We have the numbers. The lords are with us." Catelyn shook her head, tears shining. "You cannot take the city by storm. You must force her hand. Find allies among her enemies. The city a viper's nest. Be careful." Jon listened, thinking of the letter Ned had sent. Trust no one. Guard the North. He felt the old lessons harden inside him. If they failed, all of it, every death, every sacrifice, would mean nothing. At River Run, the council met again. Word arrived from White Harbor. Stannis Baratheon had declared for the true line, claiming Joffrey a bastard, the throne usurped by Lannister scheming. The North, the Vale, and Storm's End trembled on the edge of open rebellion. Jon met alone with Catelyn and her solar, firelight flickering on the stone. "You are your father's son," she said, taking his hands in hers. "You have done more than I dared hope. Ned would be proud." Jon looked away, struggling for words. "He trusted me. I cannot fail him. You will not. But do not forget you are young still, and the South is full of traps. Remember who you are. A wolf of Winterfell, and a king besides." Jon nodded, and when he left her, he felt both heavier and lighter, her blessing like a balm for old wounds. The host moved again, south toward Harrenhal, where rumor placed Tywin Lannister and his goal. Scouts returned with tales of burning villages and butchered smallfolk, Tywin's shadow moving always a day ahead. The North gave chase. There were skirmishes, quick, brutal fights among the hedges and willow groves, Lannister outriders swept aside by northern axes and spears. Jon led from the front, never asking his men to bleed where he would not. In the evenings, the tents glowed with the murmur of tired men, the air thick with the scent of smoke and hope. At Harrenhal's blackened gates, they found the castle abandoned, fires still smoldering in the great hall. The horror there, bodies flayed and nailed to the walls, the cries of the dying, set the North's blood boiling. Robb knelt beside the broken stones. "This is what they do. This is why we fight." Jon gripped his shoulder. "We end it. For the North. For Father. For all of them. Then to Rana." It was in the night, as their scouts ranged near the King's Road, that a small band of riders arrived from the Vale. Sir Lyn Corbray led them, battered but proud, the moon and falcon banners flying. "Lady Arryn sends her regards," he told Jon, "and asks if you will parley with Lord Baelish. He claims to have news of your father's fate." Jon's mouth was tight with mistrust, but he agreed. He and Robb rode out at dawn, banners furled, accompanied by a handful of guards. In a ruined mill house, they found Petyr Baelish. Smiling, pale, his fingers always moving. He bowed low, eyes flicking from Robb to Jon. "My lords, I bring you tidings from the capital. Ned Stark lives, but not for long. The Queen means to try him before the city, to break the North spirit. But there are those in the city who remember your father's honor. If you strike swiftly, if you have gold and men, there are doors that can be opened." "Ow," Robb bristled. "And what do you want for this?" Baelish smiled, all charm and calculation. "Only what I've always wanted, peace and a place at the table. The game is changing, and the Lannisters will not have the final move." Jon weighed his words, remembering what Ned had once said. "A man who plays too many games dies by them. But desperate times call for desperate bargains. Give me the names of your allies, open the gates, and when this is over, you will have your place." Baelish inclined his head, pleased. "As you wish, your grace." The plan was swift, daring, and perilous. Baelish would open the gates for a night, let a small host into the city while the main army camped beyond sight. Jon and Robb would ride with their best, steal into the Red Keep, and take Ned Stark by force. The lords protested, the risk too great, but Jon overruled them. "If we wait, he dies. If we fail, the North loses its head and its heart. We have one chance." On a night when clouds blotted the moon, Jon rode with Robb, Theon, Sir Roderick, and 100 chosen men. Baelish met them at the gate, pale and sweating, and swung the iron wide. The city was dark, quiet, but for the distant barking of dogs. They moved swift as shadows, Baelish's men guiding them through alleys and hidden doors. At the Red Keep, gold cloaks barred their path, but a word from Baelish saw the men step aside, eyes downcast. Inside, they found chaos. Lannister men scrambling to arms, shouts and bells ringing. Robb led half the force to secure the gates. Jon pushed ahead, Ghost at his side, toward the dungeons below. They found Ned chained in a cell, his beard grown wild, his face gaunt but unbroken. When Jon knelt at the bars, Ned raised his head and smiled. "You came," he said, pride and relief mingled in his voice. "Always," Jon answered, breaking the lock with a sword hilt. "Come, father. The North is waiting." They fought their way out, swords flashing, direwolves snarling. Robb took a wound to the arm. Theon slew a Lannister captain. But they broke free, their men closing around them, and rode through the sleeping city, the banners of the North snapping in the dawn wind. As they crossed the river, the bells of King's Landing told the hour, and Jon looked back at the towers gleaming gold in the morning sun. The wolf had come for the lion's den, and survived. On the far bank, as the host reassembled, Jon knelt before his father, the weight of the crown forgotten in the relief of that moment. Ned placed a hand on his son's head, his eyes shining with pride and sorrow, and something more. "You are a true Stark," Ned said softly, "and a king." Jon rose, his brothers and sisters gathered around, the North cheering their victory. In that moment, with the dawn breaking and hope reborn, Jon knew that whatever darkness lay ahead, the Wolf of Winterfell would not be cowed. The North remembered. The North endured. And Jon at last stood in the light, his father beside him, his family whole. Hey. The light on the riverbank was gold and trembling, the mist lifting in ribbons from the surface as the sun climbed higher behind the city's towers. Jon stood with his father, the battered remnants of their retinue encircling them, Winterfell's banners drooping with dew. Ned Stark leaned heavily on Jon's arm, his limbs stiff from chains and wounds, and the long journey down from the Red Keep's darkness. Yet his eyes, as gray as any wolf's, were bright with pride and sorrow both. The Northmen had no time to savor the moment. Bells still tolled from the city, a wild pealing of alarm, and behind the walls the chaos of betrayal and bloodletting swelled. Lannister men-at-arms in gold cloaks loyal to the crown surged through the streets, swords drawn, hunting shadows and traitors. Baelish's double crosses and whispered bargains had bought only hours, maybe less. Jon pressed his father toward a waiting horse, the dawn chilly on their faces. Arya and Robb met them. Arya's cheeks streaked with dirt and blood, her eyes fever bright, Robb favoring a wounded shoulder but already giving orders in a voice that brooked no refusal. Catelyn hovered close, Bran clinging to her skirts, his face pale as snow, Sansa standing behind them with red-rimmed eyes. "We ride," Jon said. "Now, before they close the roads." The camp roused to life with shouts and stamping hooves. The North's banners lifted, snapping in the freshening wind. Ghost prowled at Jon's side, hackles raised, his red eyes never leaving the city's distant gates. They set out at a trot. The host stretched thin, wounded borne in wagons, swords drawn, all eyes wary. Behind them, King's Landing burned with anger and confusion, word spreading faster than ravens could fly. The wolf had stolen back its own. The South had been shamed. The Lannisters would not forgive. For 3 days and nights, they rode hard. The kings rode empty, but for their company, and a scatter of fearful small folk, fleeing the city's unrest. The Northmen moved in a silent discipline, every man and woman aware that the eyes of the realm watched, that the next move might tip the world into ruin or salvation. Jon barely slept. When he closed his eyes, he saw his father's gaunt face, the black corridors of the Red Keep, the blood on Arya's cheek. He thought of the bargain struck with Baelish, of the look in Petyr's eyes as they parted on the docks, a look promising 100 knives yet unspent. He thought of Sansa's tears, of Robb's wound, of the lords who followed him out of loyalty, fear, and the old memory of kings in the North. At each halt, Jon moved among the men, speaking quietly, sharing bread, offering a hand or word. He found Glover and Tallheart at the wagon of the wounded, binding gashes with rough linen, and knelt beside them. He took counsel with Lady Mormont, her tone brisk but her eyes proud. "You did what you set out to do, Your Grace," she told him. "You brought Ned Stark home and shamed the lion in its den." "We paid for it," Jon answered, "and the price is not yet finished." Lady Mormont's jaw flexed. "Nothing worth winning ever is." By the time they reached the fields beyond Harrenhal, word had run ahead. Tywin Lannister was on the march, his army a coiled snake south of the Trident. Scouts rode in with tales of fire and banners, red and gold, the lion rampant. The riverlands lay wasted behind them, crops trampled, villages sacked. The Blackwoods and Brackens had joined the North, their own feuds forgotten in the greater struggle. Jon called council beneath a ragged pavilion of storm-blue cloth. Robb sat at his left, Catelyn at his right, Ned nearby in a heavy cloak, his presence silent but unyielding. The lords stood in a tight half-circle. Umber, Glover, Mormont, Mallister. All faces grave, their armor flecked with the mud of a dozen battlefields. "We have what we came for," Lord Glover said, voice carrying to every ear. "Your father is free. Let us march home, close our gates, let the South bleed itself dry." Lord Umber grunted, slapping a meaty fist into his palm. Let the lions hunt the foxes and the snakes. The North remembers." But Lady Mormont shook her head, eyes hard as flint. "If we flee now, we will find the Lannister host at our gates by winter. They will not forgive, not Tywin, not Cersei. They will come for the North and all in it. Better to face them here, where we have allies and rivers at our back." Jon listened, heart pounding, weighing the words. He looked to Ned, whose eyes met his with grave understanding. "You must decide," his father said softly. "Not as my son, but as the king they have made you." The silence was deep, expectant. Jon stood, the weight of his sword and crown heavy. "If we march home, we cede the field to the Lannisters. They will come for us when we are alone and cold. If we fight for the North, for our fathers and mothers, for every child who dreams of summer. I say we stand here. We hold the river, draw the lion into our claws. Let them learn what it is to face the wolf." The lords nodded, some slowly, some with grim pleasure. The council was decided. They would stand. The armies met on the wide, bloody plain of the Trident, the river running high and wild with the spring melt. The Lannister host outnumbered the North, banners fluttering gold and crimson. Armored knights ranked 3 deep, siege towers drawn by oxen. Tywin Lannister rode at their head, cold and stately, his face a mask. Jon stood with Robb atop a low ridge, their own banners arrayed behind them. Grey direwolf, white bear, green pine. The North's lines were tight, spears bristling, archers ready in the reeds. Robb's wound was healed enough to let him mount, though the pain was clear in his eyes. "You should not be here," Jon said quietly. "Not with that arm." Robb snorted. "And let them say the king's right hand hides when battle is joined. You'll have to chain me to keep me from the field, Jon." They clasped wrists, a bond unspoken and unbreakable. Ghost paced nearby, hackles high, his presence a reminder of older, darker strengths. The drums of the south sounded. The lion moved, a tide of gold across the plain. Jon gave the signal, and the north responded. A wall of shields, the whir of arrows, the cry of men steeling themselves against doom. The Lannister charge struck like thunder, the first line breaking on spears and axes. Horses screaming, men trampled beneath the crush. Jon was everywhere, at the center, at the flank, rallying the Glover line when it buckled, calling for reserves where the Umber spears gave way. He fought as he had trained, with patience and fury mingled. His blade steady, his purpose clear. The sun climbed, blood glinted on armor, and the river ran red. Robb was at his side, the two of them never far apart. Once, Jon lost sight of him in the press, only to find him moments later locked in combat with a knight in gilded mail. Jon's sword found the knight's exposed back, and together they pressed the enemy until the field was theirs. By dusk, the Lannisters had fallen back, their dead strewn across the Trident's muddy banks. Tywin's standard wavered in the smoke, then withdrew in orderly retreat. The North had held. That night, there was no celebration, only quiet relief. The wounded tended, the dead mourned. Jon moved among the men, lending comfort where he could, listening to the survivors, honoring the fallen. He found Arya tending a wounded squire, her hands bloodied but sure. He knelt beside her, pride swelling in his chest. "You did well," he told her. "Father would be proud." She looked up, face pale but eyes fierce. "We have to go on, don't we?" "We do," Jon said, voice gentle. "We hold until peace is won, until the North is safe." Arya nodded, a woman grown in a girl's body. She wiped her hands, stood, and went to find her mother. Ned called Jon to him before the midnight fire, the sky thick with the smoke of distant pyres. "You carry their hopes now," Ned said, his voice low, his face shadowed. "You cannot falter." Jon met his gaze, feeling the weight anew. "I will not, father. Not while I live." Ned studied him a long moment. "And when you die?" Jon was silent. Ned's hand rested on Jon's shoulder, heavy with love and pain. "Then let it be said you fell for something greater than yourself. Let it be said you left the North stronger than you found it." They embraced, father and son, the bond between them stronger than iron. A fortnight passed. The Lannisters had withdrawn, but ravens brought word of new dangers. Renly Baratheon had crowned himself in Highgarden. Stannis besieged Storm's End, the Vale in turmoil. The realm, shattered and leaderless, bled from 100 wounds. Jon met with his council in the shadow of the river, Catelyn and Robb at his side. Ned never far. "We cannot fight them all," Robb warned. "Even the wolf tires when surrounded by hunters." "Then we must choose our friends," Catelyn said. "Find the cracks in their alliance, make them our own." Jon weighed her words. "We have the North, we have the Riverlands, and some of the Vale. The South is fractured, and the West is wounded. If we stand together, Stark, Tully, Aaron, Baratheon, we can hold, perhaps even build something new." The lords murmured, some uneasy, some eager. The world was in flux, and Jon felt it. History spinning around him, each choice another thread in the tapestry of fate. He made his decision. "We will send envoys to Stannis and Renly, to the Vale, to Dorne. We will speak for peace where we can, but we will not kneel. The North will not be broken. If they come for us, they will find wolves waiting." The days grew short and sharp. Jon led his men northward at last, leaving garrisons in the riverlands, sending ravens ahead to Winterfell. The journey was hard, the army weary, but their spirits lifted as the land grew familiar. Woods and rivers known since childhood, the scent of pine and snow. At the neck, Howland Reed welcomed them with gifts of mud and wisdom. "You have changed the world, Jon Stark," he said, his eyes clever and sly. "But the world does not always thank those who change it." Jon laughed, the sound strange to his own ears. "The North thanks me, Lord Reed. That is enough." They crossed the moors and came at last to Winterfell, the old stones shining in the first frost of autumn. The gates swung wide, the people poured out. Cheering, weeping, singing the songs of the old kings. Jon rode at their head, Robb at his right, Arya and Sansa behind, Catelyn with Bran and Rickon at her side. Ned, silent and straight-backed, looked out on his home as if he saw it anew. The castle rang with life, feasts and songs, stories told by firelight, the old gods honored in the godswood. Jon moved among his people, hearing their hopes and fears, promising justice and peace. He named Robb his warden of the north, Arya his shield and scout, Sansa his ambassador to the south. Bran, wise beyond his years, became his voice among the children and the small folk. He found Ned beneath a hard tree one morning, the air sharp with the coming winter. "I did not think to see this day," Ned said, voice rough. "Nor did I," Jon replied. "But here we are." Ned looked at him, pride and regret mingled. "You have made the North proud, Jon. You have made me proud." Jon felt the words settle in his heart, a warmth against the coming cold. "Thank you, Father." They stood together in silence, the red leaves falling about them. As the first snows fell, Jon looked out from Winterfell's highest tower. The north spread below, white and wild and beautiful. The fires of war still burned in the south, the future uncertain, the price of peace not yet paid. But for now, the north endured. The wolves of Winterfell watched the horizon, ready for whatever dawn might bring. And Jon, crowned not only by lords but by love and sacrifice, knew that whatever the world demanded, he would answer. He was not just a king in the north. He was a Stark. He was his father's son, his mother's secret, and the hope of a land reborn. As the wind rose and the snow began to drift down, Jon stood at the heart of Winterfell, King Wolf and son, and faced the coming storm, unafraid. Pandene. The white winds of autumn came at last, sweeping over the north like a cleansing hand, laying frost on every roof and field, scouring the trees to bone, the world turning inward in readiness for what must come. Within Winterfell's walls, the fires burned day and night, smoke curling from every chimney, the kitchens alive with the work of harvest and preservation. The old rhythms, lost in the long months of war and absence, had returned, though all things now were touched by change. Jon moved through his days with the quiet focus of a man who knows every step is watched and every word will echo. In the great hall, his seat at the dais was carved with the direwolf anew, the tapestries rehung to show the battles won and the lost now remembered. His crown, a simple circlet of gray iron, worked with runes and wolf's heads, sat heavy upon his brow, yet never so heavy as the invisible weight of what came with it. The lives of his people, their hope, their fears, every lord and lady, every small folk child who gazed at him with wide eyes, was a reminder of what it meant to lead. He set himself to the work of kingship with the same stubborn diligence he'd once given to archery or sword play in the yard. Each morning before dawn, Jon rose, washed in cold water, and walked the ramparts with Ghost, the direwolf moving as silent as thought. He listened to the sound of the woods, the far-off bark of dogs, the slow heartbeat of Winterfell as it shook off the torpor of war. He found peace, too, in the small things. The taste of hot bread, the laughter of Rickon chasing Shaggy Dog through the snow, the rare moment when Arya would speak of her lessons with Syrio or Sansa, would sing for the household at dusk. On those mornings, Ned would sometimes join him, bundled in his thickest furs, hair gone all to silver. They rarely spoke of rule, preferring the silence they both loved, the creak of the old wood, the hush of snow settling on stone. When they did speak, it was always of the north, the needs of the crofters, the price of salt and smoked fish in White Harbor, the promise of spring if the gods willed it. "Do you ever regret it?" Jon asked once, as they watched the sun rise bloody over the godswood. "Coming home to this? To war, to loss, to everything?" Ned's mouth quirked in a small, wry smile. "I regret little, and nothing that brought me back to my family. We do what we must for those we love. The rest is only story." Jon nodded, not trusting himself to speak, the words sitting in his chest like a stone. They stood a long time in that silence, father and son, bound by love, by hardship, and by the knowledge that both would one day pass into the legend of the North. There were councils to be held, messages to be read, judgments to be given. Lords from the riverlands, the Neck, even distant Skagos came to bend the knee or to seek the king's wisdom. Jon listened as Maester Luwin read out the roll of petitions, some as simple as a border dispute, others matters of gold, grain, or marriage. Lady Mormont spoke always with directness and a hint of challenge. Lord Umber, boisterous as ever, grumbled at every new tax and then laughed loudest at every jest. The Karstarks, sullen since their own were lost in the southern wars, tested Jon's patience with demands for retribution and old rights. Yet through it all, Jon kept his temper, answering in measured tones, his memory long, his resolve quiet, but unbreakable. Robb sat to his left, hand bandaged from an old wound, learning the crafts of lordship as quickly as he'd taken to sword and shield. Sansa, golden-haired, presided over feasts and entertainments, her eyes sharper now, her tongue wise. Arya, often gone for days to ride the woods or spar with the guards, was never far from trouble but always seemed to find her way home by dusk. Jon cherished those councils, moments where he could see the shape of the North not as it was, scarred and battered, but as it might become. Strong, united, a place where the next generation could live in peace. Letters came daily from the south. Some from envoys, some from spies, many from enemies. Stannis Baratheon, now crowned and besieged by half his own realm, sent requests for aid and offers of alliance, each one colder and more formal than the last. Renly, bright and brash from Highgarden, offered sweet words and gold if Jon would only join his cause. The Vale was split, Lysa Arryn mistrustful, her banners raised but unmoving, watching and waiting. Jon read every letter himself, his eyes catching the lies, the half-truths, the desperate bargains. He answered each with a king's hand, courteous, distant, promising nothing. The North would not be drawn into another's war, not while the scars of the last still bled beneath the snow. Yet Jon knew peace could not last. The Lannisters nursed their wounds in Casterly Rock, sending out agents with fat purses to sow dissent. The Reach stirred, the Dornish waited, the Ironborn whispered of sails on the eastern sea. Maester Luwin counseled caution. Catelyn urged him to consider alliances, marriage perhaps to secure the North's future. Jon listened, nodding, but his heart rebelled at the thought. How could he wed for advantage, with so much of himself still caught between shadow and sun? Some nights, alone in his solar, he traced the lines of Lyanna's letter, her last words to Ned, and wondered what fate she had wanted for her son. The old gods watched as ever. In the godswood, Jon knelt at the heart tree, his sword laid bare before him, ghost resting at his side. The red leaves drifted down, bright as blood in the white snow. He prayed for guidance, for strength, for peace to come to the North. He remembered the faces of the men he'd lost. Hal Mullen, Clay Serwyn, those boys from Deepwood who had never seen a southern sun. He remembered the faces of the small folk, those he had saved, and those he could not. He thought, too, of his mother. Lyanna's shadow lived in the godswood, her laughter in the wind. He wondered if she would be proud, if she would understand the choices he had made. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he could almost see her. Gray-eyed and wild, a crown of blue winter roses in her hair, her hand warm on his cheek. The world turned. Time, as ever, pressed forward. Winterfell's halls grew lively again. The wedding of Lord Glover's eldest to Lady Mormont's niece filled the great hall with music and color, the banners of old friends raised high. Jon presided, offering gifts and toasts, his own heart lightened by the laughter of his kin. Robb danced with half the ladies in the hall. Arya stole the bride's garland, and even Sansa found herself smiling. That night, as the fires burned low, Jon sat with Ned and Catelyn before the hearth. The talk turned to old stories, to summer days and the games of their youth. Bran, grown thoughtful and wise, listened with shining eyes. Rickon fell asleep against Ghost's warm side. "You've given them hope," Ned said quietly, as the others drifted to their beds. "All of them. That's the true work of kings." Jon looked into the fire, seeing in the shifting flames the shadows of all that had been lost, and all that might still be won. "It was hope that saved us," he said. "Hope, and the stubbornness of the North." They sat together, the silence full of peace. Yet beyond the walls, winter deepened, and with it, the old fears returned. One cold morning, a raven arrived from Castle Black. Its message marked urgent, the words hurried and rough. Jon read it in the privacy of his solar, the letter trembling in his hands. "Your Grace, strange things stir beyond the wall. The wildlings flee south in numbers unseen. Speaking of dead things in the night, we ask for men, for food, for steel. Winter is truly coming. Jeor Mormont, Lord Commander." He called council that evening, summoning his lords, his father, his siblings. The hall was thick with anticipation, the shadows from the fire tall on the walls. "The wall is our shield," Jon told them. "If it falls, so do we." The Night's Watch asks for aid, not only in men, but in food and arms. "I mean to answer," some voices muttered. The memory of war was raw. Lord Umber slammed his fist on the table. "The wall is the North's first duty. I'll send my best, and my sons besides." Then, wow. Others agreed, some out of duty, some from fear. Lady Mormont, grim and small as ever, pledged all Bear Island could spare. Robb volunteered to lead a company himself, his eyes bright with the old Stark fire. Jon looked to his father, seeking judgment. Ned nodded, voice steady. "We have peace now, but we keep it only if we remember what it cost. The wall guarded us all these years. It is time we return the debt." Jon gave the order. Provisions were packed, men chosen. Before they set out, he stood with them in the yard, the cold sharp and bracing, the stars bright above. "The North rides with you," he told them. "You are the hope of Winterfell and all the lands beyond. Stand fast, remember your vows, and know that whatever darkness rises, the North remembers." Robb clasped his arm, Arya grinned wild, and Sansa pressed a kiss to his cheek. Bran and Rickon waved from the gatehouse as the column departed, banners streaming in the winter wind. For a time, Winterfell was quieter. No laughter from the yard, no Robb and Arya sparring at dawn, no wild tales from the kitchens. Jon walked the walls in silence, waiting for word from the wall, his heart torn between pride and dread. Sansa kept the castle running, her kindness softening the stern routines of winter. Bran, who listened to the stories of every old man and woman by the hearth, learned the secret songs of the wolves. Rickon, now the smallest Stark, grew in confidence, his eyes bright and bold. Jon found comfort in their presence, yet each day he watched the horizon, fearing what message the next raven might bring. One icy dawn, as the snow fell in silent veils, the sound of horns rose from the east. Riders returned from the wall, haggard and cold, bringing with them wildlings and men of the Night's Watch, faces pinched and eyes haunted. Lord Commander Mormont himself rode at their head, his black cloak tattered, his face grave. Jon received them in the great hall, offering food, wine, fire. "What did you see?" he asked, voice low. Mormont's eyes, hard as old iron, met his. "Dead things, Your Grace." things that walk by night, that fear neither fire nor steel. We held the wall, but the wildlings flee in thousands. There is something out there. Something old. Winter is here. The hall fell silent. Jon stood, his voice carrying to every soul. We will not yield. The North is ready. The wall will not fall while a single wolf remains in Winterfell. And as the banners of the North were raised once more, as the old songs were sung by firelight, Jon felt not fear, but a deep resolve. He had been crowned not just by war, but by the love and need of his people, by the memory of his mother, by the faith of his father. Winter had come, as it always must, but the North remembered. The North endured, and Jon Stark, King of the North, would meet the storm as his ancestors had before him, with courage, with hope, and with the fierce, unbreakable heart of a wolf. The snows grew deeper. The world beyond Winterfell's walls faded to a white and silent hush. The land blanketed in drifts so high that the trees bent beneath their weight, and even the stubborn old stone of the castle seemed to shrink against the cold. Smoke curled from every chimney. The ramparts glittered with rime. The great courtyard drifted with powder so fine it sparkled like crushed diamond in the blue light of late afternoon. In the deep of night, the cold was absolute, an ancient cold, not merely of weather, but of time itself, as if the North remembered things even the oldest songs had forgotten. Jon sat the high seat beneath banners heavy with frost. His council assembled before him in furs and leathers, faces lean from the demands of rationing, eyes clear with the hard wisdom of northerners enduring another trial. Around them the hall was quieter than in autumn, the great feasts now rare, every fire and morsel husbanded for the longer winter that might yet come. But there was no despair. In place of it, a steadiness, an acceptance, a purpose. The North did not break. It bent as pine trees do beneath heavy snow, and then, when the wind passes, straightens again. News came daily from the wall. Some brought only fear, dead men walking, wildlings who would not speak the names of the things they'd fled. Others brought more, tales of great fires in the haunted forest, of brave men holding the high passes and refusing to yield. There were victories, small, hard-fought, measured in days bought for the living, in wildling children saved from the dark. And every letter spoke of the night, growing longer, colder, stranger. Jon listened to each, read every word himself, and summoned the lords and maesters to plan, to prepare. He gave command to Robb in his absence, trusted Arya to keep watch over the riders in the wood, relied on Sansa to see the stores accounted for, to soothe tempers among the household, and encourage the singers and servants. Bran learned from every visitor, asking the wildlings their tales, and from Maester Luwin, who began to look at him not as a boy, but as a future lord in truth. Yet Jon did not remain only within the safety of the walls. When the snows eased, he rode out, Ghost at his side, to visit the outlying crofts and hamlets. His coming was always an event. The king in the north, seen by children as a figure from an old tale, by their parents as both hope and warning. Jon brought food, tools, words of encouragement, and the promise that no village would stand alone. One such journey took him east, to the frozen edge of the White Knife. The river was a solid road, great slabs of blue ice stretching as far as he could see. He rode at the head of a column, 24 men, a sledge of bread and smoked fish, bundles of wool and iron nails. They passed through birch woods haunted by crows, crossed a wind-blasted causeway where the snow hid the ancient bones of forgotten war. They came at dusk to a cluster of houses, more drift than timber, smoke curling thin from holes in sod roofs. The villagers met him with suspicion, then wonder. Then, when he dismounted, clasping hands and speaking names, a warmth that had nothing to do with fire. A girl brought him hot broth in a cracked bowl. An old woman pressed cold fingers to his cheek, weeping without shame. "You came?" she whispered. "A Stark always comes." He knelt in the snow beside her, listening to her tale. A son dead beyond the wall, a grandchild missing since the last thaw, a husband lost in the war but not forgotten. He promised her she would not want, that when the time for planting came again, she would have seed. And when the winds of winter howled, the north would howl back. That night he lay awake in a borrowed cot. Ghost sprawled beside him, staring up at rafters etched with smoke. He thought of the night's watch, of Jor Mormont, and the Black Brothers fighting in the dark. He remembered Ned's stories of winters past. Whole villages gone to ice, rivers that ran white to the sea, and the hope that somehow always returned with the spring. He prayed, not only to the old gods but to his mother, that he might be enough. When he returned to Winterfell, he brought with him a handful of wildlings, thin, fierce-eyed people with tales of terror and hunger, of things in the woods with eyes like blue stars. Sansa welcomed them. Arya challenged their children to race through the yard, and Bran sat with the oldest among them, drawing stories from the long years before the wall was built. Jon met with their leader, a woman called Ygritte, whose hair flamed brighter than the heart tree's leaves, whose tongue was quick as frostbite. "You take in my folk, king," she said, her words half dare, half grudging admiration. "You feed us, warm us, teach our children the words of your gods, but you don't ask what's coming." Jon poured them both a cup of strong, sweetened wine. "I know what's coming. I've read the letters. I've seen the faces of those who fled." She shook her head, anger flashing in her eyes. "No, you know the words. The dead walk, aye, but it's more than that. It's the cold itself come alive, and the old stories waking in the bones of the land. My people say there are things beneath the ice that never died, things that want to walk the world again." Jon met her gaze. "And will you help us fight them?" She smiled, showing small, sharp teeth. "We're here, aren't we? All we ever wanted was a place by the fire, a chance to stand before the darkness with steel in our hands." Jon nodded. "Then you'll have it. The North stands with all who fight for the living." They drank together, and for a moment, there was no difference between king and wildling, Northman and free folk. Only the shared burden of survival, and the hope that courage would outlast winter. That same night, a great horn sounded from the gatehouse. Jon rushed to the battlements, Ghost racing ahead. Below, in the whirling snow, a small party of riders approached, black cloaks flapping, brothers of the Night's Watch, faces raw with windburn, horses stumbling with exhaustion. They brought grim tidings. The wall held, but barely. The dead grew bolder, attacking every night, their numbers swelling. Some brothers had vanished in the woods, only to return with blue eyes and empty hearts. Eastwatch was cut off by storm and shadow, ravens lost to the wind. Jon assembled his council at once. By the flickering light of the hall's hearth, he listened as the watch survivors spoke. "They are clever," said one, a grizzled ranger with an empty sleeve. "They test our strength, look for weak places. Each night they grow bolder. If they break through, the first place they come is here." The hall fell silent. Even the oldest lords, those who'd seen 3 or 4 winters, looked to Jon for hope. He rose, his shadow stretching long and black upon the rushes. "Then we do what the North has always done," Jon said, voice quiet but strong. "We hold. We fight. We do not yield the gate. I'll ride to the wall with every sword I can spare. Winterfell will stand guard over the land behind us. Feed those who come. Shelter them until spring. If there is to be a last stand, let it be at the wall, where the old kings fought, where the Black Brothers still hold the line." "Ben so." The lords agreed, each pledging men and supplies, old rivalries forgotten in the shadow of what came. Robb insisted on going, as did Arya. Bran wanted to ride as well, but Jon told him softly, "Someone must hold Winterfell, Bran. Someone must remember us if we fall." He left the castle at dawn, a column of men at his back. Starks, Umbers, Mormonts, Karstarks, wildlings with axes and bows, Black Brothers with ragged cloaks and haunted eyes. Sansa stood in the gatehouse, head held high, promising all would be well. Bran watched from the ramparts. Rickon by his side, Shaggy Dog barking into the cold. Jon rode north, the snow thickening with every mile. Ghost silent and relentless beside him. The journey to the wall was a test. Of will, of loyalty, of hope. Villages they passed were deserted, doors barred, fields lying fallow beneath the white. Men and women watched them from dark windows, some calling blessings, others only praying silently that the army of the living might return. When they reached Castle Black, it was changed. A fortress of snow and ice, bristling with spears, the air full of smoke and the scent of burning. Jeor Mormont met Jon at the gate, his face graver than ever, but gladness in his eyes. "You came," the old man said. Jon clasped his arm. "We would not leave you to stand alone." The wall loomed, vast and ancient, blue with cold, streaked in places with blood and blackened by fire. The men of the watch were gaunt but unbroken. Wildlings manned the towers, learning quickly from the rangers how to hold a spear, how to stand in the shield wall. Jon spent the first night in council with Mormont, Othel Yarwick, Bowen Marsh, and the wildling chiefs. The tactics were grim, the prospects worse. Yet Jon found in their company a kind of hope. Men and women who, knowing their odds, fought on anyway. He sent ravens back to Winterfell, telling Sansa and Bran all he could, urging them to trust each other, to keep the North's spirit alive no matter what befell. The days blurred into weeks. The sky was iron gray by day, the stars like frozen tears at night. The enemy never ceased. The dead came in waves, sometimes only a handful, sometimes in numbers that seemed to fill the forest from horizon to horizon. They fought in silence, eyes blue and shining, weapons crusted with ice. Against them, Jon's army held, the living, tired but unbroken, fighting with every scrap of hope and courage left. Jon was everywhere, on the wall among the defenders, in the tunnels and on the open plain. He cheered on the young, steadied the old, fought with the wildlings, bled with the watch. He saw Arya on the southern parapet. Her face set, her arrows finding their mark in the night. He saw Robb lead the charge against a breach at the gate, Ghost at his side, fearsome as any old tale. He dreamed sometimes of Lyanna, her voice calling from beyond the snow, urging him to stand, to hope, to fight for the living. He woke each time with his heart racing, but steadied by her unseen hand. The last night was the coldest. The wind howled off the top of the wall, carrying with it the scent of deep ice. Old magic, something older than men or kingdoms. The enemy gathered beyond the woods, a vast, waiting darkness, still and terrible. Jon stood atop the wall, his sword strapped to his back, Ghost pressed close to his thigh. Robb stood beside him, his breath smoking in the air. "If we fall, the world falls with us," Robb said softly. Jon nodded. "We will not fall." Below, the torches burned bright. The men and women of the North and the Night's Watch arrayed in rows, stubborn, proud, unbowed. The horn sounded 3 times, deep and dreadful, echoing across the world. Jon raised his sword. "To the last!" he cried, and the wall roared its answer. The dead came on, endless, and the living met them with steel and fire and ancient words spoken in the dark. Above them all, the banners of the wolf and the black flew together, snapping in the storm. Jon fought at the front, sword swinging, Ghost leaping and tearing, Robb's voice shouting orders, Arya's arrows whistling death from the shadows. It was not hope that held them, in the end, but love. Love for the North, for the living, for the memory of those lost and the promise of those yet to come. The wall shuddered. The night was endless, but the North did not yield. The wolves did not break. And as the first pale light of morning touched the far, frozen horizon, Jon stood amid the fallen, his sword black with blood and rime, and knew they had held. For a day, for a night, for a generation, the living had endured. Winter had come, as it always did. But so too always did the dawn. K. The cold after battle was deeper than before. A silence not only of snow, but of exhaustion, the kind that seeps into bone and marrow and lingers in the soul. The wind fell away to nothing. The flames guttered in their braziers. Men slumped beside them, too weary for speech. The wall itself seemed to groan under the weight of so much death and struggle, the ice sweating with the effort of holding back the dark. For a time, nothing moved but the banners of wolf and black, flapping slow in the faintest of breezes, crusted now with hoarfrost and the smoke of burning. Jon walked among the living, his boots crunching in the thin, brittle crust of snow that covered the bodies. Friends, foes, wildlings, black brothers, northerners alike. The dawn was pale and wan. The sun little more than a rumor, just a suggestion of gold at the edge of the world. He saw men Hend laughed with, men who'd ridden beside him from Winterfell, men who'd come from beyond the wall only to die beneath it. He knelt by those he could, closing their eyes, whispering the old words, sometimes only laying a hand on a frozen brow. Robb limped beside him, his cloak torn, his left arm bound with strips of black wool sticky with blood. Arya walked in silence behind them, her hair dark with sweat, her cheeks streaked with soot and grief, her bow still slung across her back. Ghost was a white shadow drifting among the fallen, nose twitching, eyes shining with an unearthly light. The survivors, ragged, shivering, barely more than half-hood marched, watched Jon's face as he passed. They needed something, he realized. Not words, not commands, not even hope. Only for him to stand, to see, to remember. He knelt last beside a man whose hair was wild and red. Pale even in life, Ygritte lay with eyes open to the sky, a half-smile on her mouth, a dagger still gripped in her cold hand. Jon smoothed her hair, spoke words for her, in the tongue of the free folk, and closed her eyes. The men around him bowed their heads, wildling and brother alike. It was a moment outside of banners, outside of kingdoms, outside of all the old wrongs. There were so many more to mourn. They spent that first day burning the dead. It was the only kindness left. Black smoke rose above the wall, the flames leaping hungrily, devouring the bodies so that they could not rise again with blue fire in their eyes. Jon said the words over each pyre, until his voice was hoarse, until the tears froze on his cheeks. Robb read the names from a battered roll, pausing often, his hand shaking. Arya stood by Ghost, her face set and empty as the wind carried the ashes away. Night fell again, black and terrible. Men huddled together in the shadow of the wall, the air thick with old terror, the taste of grief and fire sharp on the tongue. Yet there was something else now, a sense of having come through, of having paid the price and found themselves still alive on the other side. In the weeks that followed, life found its way back, slow as spring thaw. The Watch rebuilt their barricades and towers, patching breaches, clearing snow from the old stones. Wildlings and brothers worked side by side, not as friends, but as survivors. Mormont set new watches, rotating the wounded south to rest, sending riders to hunt and gather. Jon met each morning with the old bear, reviewing reports, drawing lines on maps as new threats moved across the white. The enemy had fallen back into the darkness for now. There were skirmishes at the Shadow Tower and Eastwatch, but nothing like the night they'd faced together. Supplies ran low. Men went hungry, but none starved. Ravens came from Winterfell, from White Harbor, from Bear Island, grain, salt pork, dried beans, even roots from half-frozen fields. Jon thanked each messenger himself. He sent Sansa's letters of comfort back with them. The news that the North endured, that hope still lived. The wounded filled the warmest rooms, cared for by every able hand. Black, free folk, Northman alike. Bran sent herbs. Catelyn sent wool and honey. Arya brought laughter when she could, crude jokes and wild stories, but her eyes were always watchful, always waiting for the next call to arms. Jon spent his nights on the wall itself, sometimes in silence, sometimes in council with Mormont and Robb. They watched the horizon together, saw the auroras flickering green and blue in the night sky. wondered what lay beyond the woods and the endless white. One clear night, as the cold stars burned above them, Robb leaned close. "We did it, Jon. We held. Father would be proud." Jon thought of Ned, of the promise made so many winters ago beneath the heart tree, of the burdens carried and the debts paid. "We're not finished yet," he said softly. "But yes, I think he would." Robb smiled, teeth white in the moonlight, and said no more. Letters arrived from the south. Stannis had pressed his claim. Renly's banners clashed with Lannister gold. The Ironborn raided the western coasts. Dorne kept silent, but rumors drifted of ships massing, alliances forming. The realm spun on, torn by ambition, vengeance, and the wounds of war. Jon rode back. "The North will not march. The North guards the wall. The North stands for the living." Lords wrote of sons lost, of hunger, of fear. Jon replied to each, careful and honest. No false promises, but the assurance that Winterfell remembered them, that their king stood with them, that when spring came, the North would rise together. He received a raven from the Vale, a message written in Sansa's clear, strong hand. "Jon, the lords here quarrel, but they listen when I speak your name. They remember mother and father and the oaths that bind us all. Do not lose hope. I will see the Eyrie stands with the North whatever comes. Sansa." He carried that letter with him for days, folded and refolded, a small anchor against the undertow of worry and fatigue. As the wall was secured and the dead buried, Jon turned his thoughts homeward. Winterfell needed him. The North was restless, wolves and men alike sensing the end of something, the coming of something new. He met one last time with Mormont, who had aged a decade in a winter. "You've done all we could ask, Lord Stark. Your father would have been proud. The watch is in your debt." Jon clasped his hand. "No debts between the living. We'll send what aid we can, whatever the snows allow." Mormont nodded, his gaze distant, full of old grief and hope. "The wall holds. For now, that is enough." Jon hugged Arya fiercely, promising to send for her if there was need, and bid Robb return with him to Winterfell, knowing the North needed both its wolves. They rode south with a small escort, the wild and broken land bright with the first hints of sun, the snow crusted and glittering. Villages opened their doors to them, crowds cheering, children staring wide-eyed at the king who had held the wall. Old men wept. Women offered gifts. Bread, a pot of honey, a knitted scarf. They arrived at Winterfell to the clangor of bells and the rush of household and small folk crowding the gates. Bran greeted them first, solemn and straight in a fur-lined cloak, with Rickon and Shaggy Dog tumbling at his heels. Sansa stood by the gatehouse. Her smile weary but full of pride. Ned and Catelyn, arm in arm, welcomed them home, their faces deeply lined but shining in the sunlight. The feast that night was humble. Salted fish and root stew, bread warm from the oven, ale and cider passed from hand to hand, but joy ran through it like fire. The hall rang with song, laughter, stories of the battle retold and grown in the telling. Jon sat at the high seat, crown set aside, his family all around. He watched Arya teach Bran a new game with a pair of wolf bones, saw Robb toss Rickon high until the little one shrieked with delight, saw Sansa slip away to comfort a tired servant girl, saw Ned and Catelyn watching it all, love plain in their eyes. That night, after the fires died and the halls quieted, Jon walked alone into the Godswood, ghost gliding ahead. He knelt at the heart tree, the snow still falling, red leaves drifting about his shoulders. He spoke softly, not to the old gods only, but to his mother and father, to all the dead who had walked with him on the long road north and back again. "We held," he whispered. "We kept our vows. I am only one man, but I kept faith. With you, with the North, with those I love. If you watch, if you listen, know that your son did not yield." He felt a peace then, deep and clean as the cold. He pressed his brow to the heart tree, breathing the scent of snow and sap, the memory of summers long gone. Winter passed as it always did, slow and grinding, Then suddenly, almost unnoticed, the world softened at the edges. The days lengthened, the ice on the pools grew thin, the first crocus blooms appeared by the kitchen garden. Ravens brought word of peace, or what passed for peace. Stannis holding the throne by right of war, the Lannisters diminished, the Riverlands settling into uneasy truce. The South was still the South, a place of secrets and schemes, but for now, it left the North to its own fate. Jon ruled quietly. He built, he healed, he listened. He sent men to rebuild ruined hamlets, to plant where the ground allowed. He brought wildlings into the North's fold, settling them where they would work the land and swear new oaths. Children born that spring bore names from both sides of the wall, new stories replacing old hatreds. He named Robb Lord of the Neck in the Western Marches, giving him dominion over the wild borderlands and the task of keeping peace. Arya rode south to serve as his voice and eyes in the courts of the South. Untamed, sharp, fearless, Sansa became his counselor, keeper of the hearth and heart of Winterfell. Wise beyond her years, beloved by all, Bran studied with maesters and the old wise women, learning the secrets of trees and stars. Rickon grew in strength and mischief, beloved of every man and wolf in the hall. Jon watched them all, pride and humility mingling, and thanked the old gods every day for the life that remained. One evening, as the last light faded from the sky, Jon walked the battlements with Ned, who leaned on a cane now, but whose gaze was as sharp as ever. "Are you content, Jon?" Ned asked, his voice low and searching. Jon thought for a long moment. He remembered the boy who dreamed only of belonging, who had feared his own name and future. He remembered the crown pressed into his hand, the sword stained with blood and ice. He looked out over the fields, the forests, the river shining gold in the setting sun, the walls of Winterfell, strong and whole. "Yes," Jon said at last, "I am." They stood together in the falling dusk, the last of the light painting their faces. The world was still troubled, still imperfect, still waiting for the next storm. But for this night, the wolves were home, and the North was at peace. Wow. Ka. The spring that crept across the North was slow and cautious, as if the land itself distrusted warmth and green things after so many months of darkness and hunger. Even as the rivers broke their ice and the air grew soft, the people of Winterfell remained watchful, tending fires at night, peering at the horizon for storms or worse. But slowly, surely, life returned. Patches of earth appeared along the walls, brown at first, then flecked with green. Lambs bleated in the fields beyond the gates, and the woods filled with the sounds of nesting birds and melting snow dripping from branches. Jon felt the change as a lifting of weight in his bones. He stood each dawn upon the battlements, breathing the air that carried both the cold of winter and the promise of new days. He watched the sun rise over the broken tower, the sky pink and gold, and listened to the sounds of the castle waking, kitchen maids chattering, the smith's hammer ringing, boys laughing as they carried baskets from the cellars to the yard. Ghost patrolled at his side, still vigilant, but with a new, loose-limbed ease to his gait, as if even the direwolf had begun to trust the season. News from beyond the North spoke of uneasy peace. Stannis Baratheon sat the Iron Throne in King's Landing, his claim secured through fire and law, but the South grumbled under his cold rule. The Lannisters had slunk back to the west, Tywin dead and Cersei exiled to the Rock. The Vale was at last quiet. Sansa's letters full of cautious optimism, tales of young lords learning their lessons under her sharp but gentle hand. The Riverlands and the Reach, battered and exhausted, sent envoys to Winterfell, seeking trade and the goodwill of the Wolf King. Jon welcomed them with northern courtesy, neither cold nor too warm, always alert for the shadow of past betrayals. He hosted them in the great hall, where the banners of the North hung clean and new, the feasts modest but hearty, the laughter honest and wary. His council was always present, Robb and Arya home again after a long ride to White Harbor, Sansa radiant in her seat, Bran and Rickon listening with wide eyes to the talk of strange southern fruits, ports, and coin. After supper, when the envoys had retired and the younger children chased each other through the dim corridors, Jon would meet with Ned in the solar, the old wolf sitting by the fire, cane in hand, eyes shining with the reflection of flames. "We have peace for now," Ned would say. "But peace is only another kind of labor. You must keep it, Jon. Not through fear, through fairness and the memory of what was lost." Jon listened, and tried always to heed. In the spring markets, he forgave a year's taxes for the crofters whose fields had been burned or frozen. He ordered new timber sent to the villages lost in the war, and gave land to the wildlings who had bled for the north at the wall. He listened to complaints, settled feuds, punished those who preyed upon the weak. The people noticed. They called him the quiet king, the wolf in spring, and they watched for his passing with something approaching hope. He did not forget the lessons of the long winter. Each night, before sleep, Jon walked the godswood, ghost padding behind, the heart trees face a pale mask in the dusk. He prayed for those who had not come home, and for those who never would, for Ygritte and Hal Malin, for the boys from Deepwood and Bear Island, for all the old kings whose bones lay somewhere beneath the snow. Robb thrived in his new role as Warden of the Neck and the Western Marches, his rule there marked by the same blend of strength and gentleness that made men follow him in war. He rode often, sending news of marshes tamed, bandits scattered, new bridges rising from the floodplains. Arya, his tireless companion, kept the peace with laughter, sharp eyes, and a willingness to settle disputes with a race or a duel as often as with threats. She wrote to Jon, always in short bursts, tales of wild rides and the new cubs in the Wolfwood, of old crannogmen teaching her to hunt by starlight. Sansa sent letters as well, long careful missives from the Eyrie and later from Gulltown, her words full of politics, small folks' gossip, and the slow cautious flowering of friendships between old rivals. She advised Jon in all things, her instinct for hearts and moods a counter to his directness. The Vale, once cold and suspicious, began to open its doors to northern merchants, and talk spread of alliances sealed by marriages, by trade, by the shared memory of the Tully bloodline. Bran, grown taller and more thoughtful by the week, spent his days in study, runes and ravens, histories, wildling tongues. He haunted the library, questioning Maester Luwin on every subject under the sun. Jon sometimes found him with old Nan, listening rapt as she spun tales of the giants and children, of the world before the coming of men. Rickon was everywhere at once, a whirlwind of energy, adored by the people, feared by every stray sheep and kitchen cat. His bond with Shaggy Dog only deepened. The two of them often found together in the woods, or napping in the sun on a heap of furs outside the kennels. The castle itself healed. Where walls had crumbled, new stone rose. Where fire had blackened timbers, fresh wood gleamed. The godswood flourished, red leaves growing thick, wildflowers returning to the banks of the pool. The people of Winterfell, servants, guards, cooks, smiths, the families of the men lost at the wall, stayed on and new faces joined them. Wildlings, Riverlanders, children of old enemies now sworn to peace. The wildlings Jon had welcomed became a vital part of the New North. Tormund Giantsbane took a house in the hills near the Long Lake, his sons joining the guards of Deepwood Motte. Val, fierce and proud, served as an envoy to her people, brokering peace between clans and convincing the last holdouts to come south, to till the land rather than raid. Some small folk still grumbled at their presence, but Jon saw the walls between his people and the free folk crumble, day by day, as wildling children ran with northern children, as marriages were made and fields plowed together. In late spring, a host from White Harbor arrived, bearing gifts, salt fish, barrels of mead, silks from the east, and a small fleet of sturdy ships. Lord Manderley himself knelt before Jon in the godswood, his oaths echoing through the trees. "You kept the faith," Manderley declared, when the rest of the realm forgot it. "The north is yours, your grace, in winter and in spring." Jon raised him, clasped his hands, and welcomed the Manderleys to his hearth. Peace brought its own challenges. Raiders from the Western Isles struck at the coast, testing the strength of the new order. Jon sent ships and men, and when he learned that the attacks had been encouraged by Cersei Lannister herself, he sent a quiet warning south, signed in his own hand. The wolf still watched. The next raid was met with fire and steel, and did not return. News came from the wall. The Watch was rebuilding, its ranks filled now by wildlings and the younger sons of new northern houses. The Night's Watch had changed, no longer the last refuge of the desperate, but a brotherhood forged anew. Jon sent supplies, and when spring was fully upon the world, he traveled north once more, this time as king, to walk the wall and speak with Lord Commander Mormont. They met in the Lord Commander's solar, its walls thick with frost. The old raven perched above the hearth. "We are alive," Mormont said, pouring wine, "and for a little while, that is enough. But the wild is never empty, and old things sleep uneasy." Jon agreed. They walked the wall together, gazing north into the endless white. Jon left a detachment of Mormont and Umbermen, then returned to Winterfell, his heart lighter, his resolve stronger. As the year turned, Jon called a great feast. Lords and ladies from every part of the north came, old enemies now friends, wildlings, the children of the Riverlands and the Vale. The hall was hung with garlands, the tables heavy with bread, venison, pies, honey, and fruit. Singers played from the dais, the flames danced in the hearths, and laughter filled the air. Ned rose to speak, leaning on his cane, his voice strong enough to reach every shadow. "We have seen war, and loss, and hunger. We have known what it is to stand alone, and what it is to stand together. My son is king by right, but more by the will of the North. Let us honor the living, remember the dead, and pray that peace will last until our children are grown." Then, the hall lifted their cups, their cheers echoing from the stones. Jon sat beside his father, his siblings ranged about him, Ghost at his feet, and for the first time in years, felt a happiness that did not come with a shadow. Late that night, long after the fires had burned low, Jon found himself on the ramparts with Arya. The sky was full of stars, the wind cool, but gentle. "Do you miss it?" Arya asked, her voice quiet. "Battle, the old days, riding alone." "Sometimes," Jon admitted, "but I've seen enough of war. I'd rather watch the world heal. I'd rather see you and Robb and Sansa find happiness and peace." She nodded, grinning. "I suppose someone has to keep the peace. I'll keep the wildness for us both." Jon laughed. "See that you do." They stood together, watching the sunrise spill gold over Winterfell. The land spread out below. Green fields, dark woods, distant rivers. Life, persistent and brave. And so the North endured. Each spring brought renewal, each winter a test. Jon ruled as he had fought, with patience, with honor, with the quiet certainty that love was the only power worth having. The stories that followed were smaller than the ones that had brought him the crown. The rebuilding of a mill, the marriage of a wildling girl to a blacksmith's son, a new hall built to house the books and tales of the old kings. His children, when they came, grew up knowing both sorrow and joy. They ran with Ghost's pups in the Godswood. They learned to fight and to read, to judge and to forgive. The old songs found new voices. The old wounds became scars, reminders of the price paid and the life bought with it. Sometimes, in the quiet, Jon would walk the wall or the woods, feeling the eyes of the old gods on his back, the memory of his father's hand on his shoulder, the echo of his mother's voice in the wind. He was king in the North. He was a Stark. He was at last home. And for many years to come, the North remembered. And the North endured. A.K. The years unfolded in quiet circles, slow and measured, like ripples spreading from a stone cast into the heart of a clear pond. In Winterfell, the world found a new rhythm. Each day built atop the labor and pain and hope that had carried the North through its darkest storm. Jon grew into his kingship the way a tree grows into its shape, by increments and necessity, his life shaped not by his will alone, but by the soil and weather and the countless roots intertwined beneath. He rose each day before dawn, as he had in war, and walked the ramparts with Ghost at his side. The direwolf was grizzled now, his white fur streaked with gray, his muzzle scarred, but his eyes were as keen as ever, and Jon trusted them more than any sentry on the wall. The world seemed smaller from above, the woods pressed in by new fields, the rivers tamed by bridges and dikes, the roads tracked by wagons and riders, moving with purpose even in the thin blue light. Jon greeted the guards by name, stopping to share a word or a smile, sometimes simply a nod. He saw the strength of the North reflected in their faces. Old men who'd fought in the snows, boys who had never known a world at war, wildlings and Normans, Mormonts and Umbers, free folk and crofters, all of them bound now not just by banners, but by the quiet shared pride of survivors. His mornings were spent in council. Robb, bearded and broader of shoulder, ruled the neck from Greywater Watch and rode to Winterfell for counsel, every moon's turn, his hair now flecked with copper, his laughter deeper. Arya, seldom still, sent letters from east and south, her handwriting bold and hurried, tales of her work in the wilds, peace made between mountain clans, old feuds mended, news carried between lords who would once have drawn swords at the mere rumor of insult. Sansa's letters arrived each week from Gulltown or the Eyrie, full of the small events that shaped peace. A feast for a new bride, a dispute settled between merchants, the birth of a child or the death of a stubborn lord. She ruled her household with a gentle hand and an iron will, admired by many and loved by all. And her name was spoken with respect in every keep from White Harbor to Moat Cailin. Bran became a quiet mystery. He read every book in the Maester's Tower, then began to write his own, filling pages with maps of routes and rivers, with the secrets of wind and weather, with stories he claimed the trees whispered on long summer evenings. The children of Winterfell adored him, following him into the woods, learning to listen to the call of birds and the rustle of wind through red leaves. Rickon grew tall and wild, quick to laughter and quick to fight, forever chasing hounds through the stables or racing Shaggy Dog through the woods. Jon watched him, sometimes with worry, more often with pride. Rickon was the North made flesh, fierce and loyal and free. Catelyn remained, her hair gone silver, her voice softer, but her presence an anchor in the chaos of changing days. Ned, now moving slow, his cane tapping through the halls, spent more time in the Godswood, his silence the equal of any wisdom spoken aloud. He and Jon sometimes walked together, neither needing to fill the quiet with words. The people of Winterfell grew too. The wildlings and their children blended into the life of the castle and the land beyond. In spring, the first wildling child was baptized in the Godswood. In autumn, girl married a wildling boy, her kin and his joining hands beneath the heart tree. By midsummer, new settlements dotted the woods and hills. Villages built by free folk and Northmen together, their houses wreathed in smoke, laughter, and the constant necessary work of survival. The old gods were honored with each harvest, and with each birth, and at every solstice bonfire. The Sept, small and seldom used, stood quiet beside the Godswood, but the people came to it in their time. For weddings and prayers, and comfort in grief. Sansa made certain there were candles for all the gods, and that no one was ever turned away, regardless of their name or history. Jon's rule was marked not by grandeur, but by fairness and remembrance. When men from the Riverlands came seeking land after their own was ruined, he offered them places by the rivers and the new-cut fields, asking only that they swear the old oaths and raise their children as free men of the North. He settled old disputes with patience, sometimes with laughter, and rarely, but firmly, with the threat of the sword. The coin of the North became valued again in White Harbor, its wolf-stamped silver traded for grain, timber, and rare cloth from the east. The market grew, and with it, the city, until Lord Manderly wrote to Jon that he would soon have to raise new walls for all the newcomers. Ambassadors from the south and the Reach arrived, bringing gifts, casks of arbor gold, silks from Old Town, even a sapling said to have come from the orchards of Sunspear. Jon accepted all with courtesy, gifting them in turn with furs, iron, and carved horn, with wild honey and the hard, clear northern brandy that brought tears to the eyes of even the boldest Southron. In all things, Jon moved carefully, keeping his counsel broad. Lady Mormont, never one to flatter, rode to Winterfell each summer to give him her blunt advice and to ensure he never forgot the price paid by Bear Island. The Karstark sent their sons to serve as squires, and the old Glover Lord lived out his last days by the fire in Winterfell's great hall, teaching the youngest how to carve wood and play at chess. When word came that a Lannister cousin sought asylum, Jon weighed every tale before giving judgment. He welcomed the man, demanding only that he leave behind the golden pride of Casterly Rock and take up work in the cellars. The man accepted, and in time, grew to call himself Northman, his sons learning to swing axes alongside the rest. One spring the rivers flooded as never before. Whole villages fled to Winterfell, carrying their children and what they could on their backs. Jon rode out with his men, organizing the building of levees, sending grain and seed ahead, helping dig ditches and raise huts. The work was hard, and some drowned, but more were saved. When the waters fell, the fields were richer than before, and the people celebrated with music and dancing, the North's stubborn joy echoing through the hills. Ghost's health waned in the deep winter that followed, his muzzle whitening, his movements slower, but he remained ever by Jon's side. When at last Ghost passed, Jon buried him at the edge of the Godswood, marking the spot with a great stone carved with runes of wolf and winter. The castle mourned with Jon, for Ghost had been a part of every victory, every feast, every sorrow. Children grew, time pressed forward. The old faces faded from the hearth, and new ones took their place. Arya married, to the surprise of many, a northern ranger who matched her wildness step for step. Sansa, courted by many, chose a quiet knight from the Vale, and together they ruled Gulltown with steady hands and open hearts. Bran became the master of laws and lore, his writings now copied by the maesters and read even in Old Town. Rickon was named heir to Winterfell, a young lord of fierce promise, already a legend among his peers. Jon himself found happiness in his own time. He married a woman of the North, a wildling wise in the ways of herbs and wolves, as fierce in argument as in laughter, as unafraid of ghosts as of lords. Their children grew strong, chasing each other through the Godswood, learning both the sword and the old songs, the rules of the hall and the freedom of the wind. Jon taught them, as his father had taught him, with patience, with stories, with long walks beneath the trees, and the quiet wisdom of a heart that had known sorrow and survived. He told them of Lyanna, their grandmother, of the promise made at the Tower of Joy, of the meaning of the word Stark. He taught them to listen, to the land, to the old gods, to the voices of those who came before. As the children grew, the North grew with them. Old scars faded, replaced by new roots. Summer and autumn came and went, winters waxed and waned. The world beyond the neck changed as well. Kings rose and fell, but the North endured, steadfast in its ways. When Jon was old, his hair touched with silver, his hands marked by the work and the winters, he stood once more on the ramparts, his youngest beside him, the air sharp with the coming of snow. He looked out at the land, fields ready for harvest, smoke rising from villages, woods thick and wild, and smiled, a deep and grateful smile. "Will you always be king?" his son asked, voice full of wonder and dread. Jon bent to him, ruffling his hair. "No king rules forever. One day you or your sister or another wolf will take my place. But you will never be alone. The North remembers, always." The boy nodded, solemn as only the young can be, his eyes catching the last gold of the setting sun. They stood together in silence, the sound of laughter from the yard below, the calls of distant wolves threading through the dusk. Jon closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the peace he had worked for, the love that had shaped him, the memory of all who had come before. He felt his father's hand, his mother's voice, Ghost's silent devotion, and the wild, unbroken spirit of the North at his back. He was king, but more? He was home, he was remembered. And as night fell, the old castle warmed behind him, and the future burning quietly ahead. Jon Stark, son of Winterfell, smiled and let himself rest, certain that his north would endure. The snow came softly, and with it, the next season's hope.